Hey guys, tonight we are embarking on a journey not through bustling ancient cities or the grand courts of forgotten empires, but into the windswept, often mist-shrouded landscapes of prehistoric Europe. Imagine yourself as Egeria standing before a colossal weathered stone, a silent sentinel that has watched millennia unfold its surface covered in lichen. The wind sighing around it carrying the faint, almost inaudible whispers of a people long vanished. Tonight we are seeking the mysterious megaliths of Europe and their gentle legends. Those enigmatic giant stone monuments that dot the continent, from the rugged coasts of Brittany and Ireland to the windswept plains of Salisbury and the remote islands of Orkney. Now, trying to build your very own personal Stonehenge in your suburban backyard using only authentic Neolithic technology, which mostly involves very large rocks, a lot of rope, an impressive number of exceedingly strong friends who owe you a very big favor, and a somewhat vague, if enthusiastic, understanding of celestial alignments gleaned from a particularly dramatic, but possibly not entirely accurate television documentary, your chances of achieving precise astronomical alignment for the summer solstice, and more importantly, avoiding a rather catastrophic domino effect topple of several multi-ton sarsen stones directly onto your prize-winning petunias, and possibly also your neighbor's prize-winning, and now understandably rather irate prize pig would be, let's just say, remarkably almost comically slim. These ancient builders of Egeria were seriously impressive, and probably also possessed some very effective health and safety chants, or at least a very high tolerance for hernias. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to hear where you're drifting off from tonight as we prepare to wander among these ancient whispering stones. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your sleepy historical pilgrimage Egeria takes you back thousands of years deep into the Neolithic New Stone Age and Early Bronze Age of Europe, a period roughly spanning from around 4500 BCE to about 1500 BCE in many of the regions we'll be considering. This is a time before the rise of classical Greece or Rome, an era when writing was either non-existent or in its very earliest, most rudimentary stages in these northern and western lands. The people who lived here, the builders of these stone monuments, have left us no written text to explain their beliefs, their rituals, or the precise purpose of their colossal undertakings. Their stories are etched not in ink on papyrus, but in the enduring enigmatic language of stone itself, and in the subtle clues they left behind in the earth. A mainstream historical fact is that megalithic monuments, structures made of large stones, from the Greek mega meaning great and lithos meaning stone, are a defining feature of prehistoric Europe. They represent some of the earliest and most impressive examples of monumental architecture created by humankind, testifying to complex social organization, sophisticated if pre-scientific engineering skills, and deeply held belief systems among these ancient farming communities. These aren't just random rocks piled up. They are intentional, often highly symbolic constructions. As you find yourself standing in one of these ancient European landscapes, perhaps the rolling chalk downlands of southern England, the wind-swept moors of Brittany and France, the lush green fields of Ireland, or the remote heather-covered islands of Scotland, you are immediately struck by the sheer palpable sense of immense antiquity and profound endurance. These stones, whether solitary menhirs, thrusting towards the sky like forgotten fingers of ancient giants, or complex circles of trilithons standing in silent, patient congregation, have witnessed the passage of countless seasons, the rise and fall of forests, the shifting of coastlines, and the comings and goings of innumerable human generations. They are the silent, weathered witnesses to a past so deep it almost defies our modern comprehension. The ancient megalith builders of Egeria didn't have access to advanced computer-aided design CAD software laser levels or heavy diesel-powered lifting equipment. They had very large, very heavy rocks, probably a lot of very strong, locally sourced ropes made from animal hides or plant fibers, an impressive amount of communal effort and shared purpose, and quite possibly a particularly charismatic and highly persuasive chief or priest who was really keen on having the absolute largest, most astronomically aligned standing stone in the entire valley, if not the entire region. Just a little further to the left there, Og, my lad. Well, you can almost hear him bellowing, "No, no, your other left." And for the love of the great Earth Mother, try not to drop it directly into that rather sacred and inconveniently located bog. This time, we're trying to impress the solstice here, not create a new wetland habitat. The whispering winds of our section title are more than just a poetic flourish area. When you stand among these ancient stones, especially in a remote, quiet location, the wind sighing through the gaps, rustling the surrounding grasses, or whistling around a solitary menhir often seems to carry with it a sense of ancient voices, of lost languages, of forgotten rituals. The atmosphere of many megalithic sites is undeniably evocative, often possessing a distinct numen losh, a spirit of place that can feel both profoundly peaceful and slightly unsettling. These sites were not chosen at random. They were often deliberately located in landscapes that were already perceived as special or sacred. Perhaps hilltops with panoramic views, clearings in ancient forest places near significant water sources, or areas with unusual geological formations. The stones themselves, carefully selected, quarried often from many miles away, and transported with immense effort, were then integrated into the sacred landscape, becoming focal points for belief and ceremony, their very presence enhancing the inherent power of the place. And these stones area are guarding ancient secrets. While modern archaeology, with its increasingly sophisticated techniques, has revealed a great deal about the construction methods, the likely dating and some of the possible functions of these megalithic monuments, many were clearly associated with burial rituals, others with astronomical observation and calendrical purposes, and most undoubtedly with complex religious or ceremonial activities. Their precise full meanings, the exact nuances of the beliefs that inspired their creation, often remain tantalizingly elusive, shrouded in the dense mists of prehistory. The people who built them, these largely anonymous Neolithic and Bronze Age communities, are known to us primarily through their material remains, their pottery, their stone tools, their settlement patterns, and of course these magnificent stone structures. Their specific myths, their detailed cosmologies, the exact words of their chants and prayers, these have for the most part vanished with the winds of time, leaving us to interpret the silent, enduring language of the stones themselves. These ancient stones, Egeria, have seen it all. Ice ages retreating, Bronze ages dawning, probably a few really awkward, almost silent first dates between shy Neolithic teenagers who communicated mostly through a series of carefully aimed grunts and the strategic offering of a particularly well-polished flint arrowhead. If only they could actually talk. Though, knowing our luck, after patiently waiting for 5,000 years for someone to finally ask them about their deepest secrets, they'd probably just complain bitterly about the incessant pigeons, the general dampness of the European climate, and the regrettable decline in the quality of modern sacrificial offerings. The precise social structures, the exact nature of the religious beliefs, and the specific ideological drivers behind the widespread and often remarkably parallel adoption of megalithic construction techniques across such diverse Neolithic and Bronze Age European cultures. Whether this phenomenon was primarily driven by the spread of new agricultural practices and associated fertility cults, the rise of increasingly hierarchical chiefly power structures seeking to legitimize their authority through monumental building, the development of sophisticated cosmological understandings and calendrical systems, or perhaps a complex regionally varied interplay of these and many other local environmental and social factors, remain subjects of extensive ongoing archaeological research and often quite vigorous theoretical discussion among prehistorians. But even without knowing all their secrets, the sheer scale, the enduring presence, and the profound mystery of these ancient stones continue to exert a powerful allure upon the modern imagination. They speak to us of a time when human beings, with only the simplest of tools, but with immense ingenuity, communal effort, and a deep spiritual connection to their world, were capable of creating structures that would outlast empires, that would stand as silent, enigmatic testaments to their existence for millennia to come. And as we begin our sleepy journey to explore some of these most famous and most mysterious megalithic sites, Iguria, we will also touch upon the gentle legends, the folklore, the tales of giants, fairies and dancing stones that later generations, long after the original meanings were forgotten, wove around these ancient whispering sentinels, attempting to explain their inexplicable presence and to capture some of their enduring magical power. You are now Iguria, standing on the cusp of prehistoric Europe, the wind whispering ancient secrets around you, the very earth beneath your feet, seeming to hum with the echoes of a long-vanished people who possessed an extraordinary, almost obsessive reverence for stone. You've glimpsed the misty, evocative landscapes where these enigmatic monuments rise silent sentinels, guarding the mysteries of a time before written words, before the clamor of iron, before the rise of empires we now deem ancient. But what exactly are these megaliths, these giants' footprints, as our outline poetically calls them? Before we can truly delve into their gentle legends and their profound, if often elusive purposes, we must first become acquainted with the diverse forms these magnificent stone wonders can take, the enduring, tangible legacy of those skilled, determined and largely anonymous Neolithic and Bronze Age stone builders. The word megalith itself, as we've noted, comes from the Greek mega meaning great or large, and lithos meaning stone. So quite simply, we are talking about structures made of large stones. But this simple definition belies an astonishing variety of architectural forms, a testament to the ingenuity, the diverse beliefs, and the immense communal effort of the peoples who created them across the vast expanse of prehistoric Europe, from the windswept Atlantic coasts of Ireland, Britain, and Brittany through Scandinavia, across the plains of Germany and Poland, and down into the sun-drenched lands of Iberia and the islands of the Mediterranean. A mainstream historical fact is that European megalithic architecture, dating primarily from the Neolithic New Stone Age and Chalcolithic Copper Age into the early Bronze Age, roughly from around 4800 BCE to about 1500 BCE in its most prolific Western European expressions, encompasses an incredibly diverse range of structures. These include single standing stones known as menhirs burial chambers, constructed from massive stone slabs called dolmens, which were often originally covered by earthen mounds or stone cairns. Circular arrangements of standing stones, commonly referred to as stone circles or cromlechs. Long, often parallel rows of stones known as alignments, and highly elaborate passage graves or chamber tombs, all testifying to the sophisticated engineering skills, complex social organization, and deeply held belief systems of these prehistoric farming communities. Let us begin Iguria with perhaps the simplest, yet often one of the most strikingly evocative forms of megalith, the menhir or single standing stone. Imagine a colossal, unworked, or roughly shaped monolith, a single great finger of granite or sandstone, thrusting defiantly upwards from the earth, sometimes reaching heights of 20, 30, or even more feet, and weighing many, many tons. The menhir, it's basically prehistoric Europe's original incredibly large, exceptionally stoic, and entirely non-ironic garden gnome. But instead of a pointy red hat and a tiny fishing rod, it just stands there, majestically, silently. Possibly judging your modern fashion choices and your regrettable lack of appropriate sacrificial offerings. And definitely significantly much harder to accidentally knock over with the lawnmower, which of course hadn't been invented yet, so it was probably more at risk from particularly clumsy aurochs or overly enthusiastic Neolithic children engaged in a game of Tag the Sacred Monolith. These solitary stones are found across much of megalithic Europe. Sometimes they stand entirely alone, dominating a hilltop or a plain. Other times they are arranged in deliberate lines or avenues like the Great Alignments we will explore later at Carnac in Brittany, or as part of more complex ceremonial landscapes. Their precise purpose is often a mystery, but theories abound. Perhaps they were territorial markers defining the boundaries of a clan's land. Maybe they were memorials to important individuals or significant events. Some might have served as astronomical pointers aligned with the rising or setting of the sun, moon, or specific stars at crucial times of the year. Or they could have been potent phallic symbols associated with fertility cults and the life-giving power of the earth. Then there are the dolmens, a term often used especially in older archaeological literature, and still popularly to describe a type of megalithic tomb, typically constructed from 3 or more large upright stone slabs, supporting a massive flat capstone, thereby creating a simple box-like chamber. Many of these dolmens were originally entirely covered by a substantial earthen mound, a barrow or cairn of smaller stones which has since eroded away, leaving only the dramatic stone skeleton exposed. Imagine these structures aguria, like ancient, incredibly sturdy stone picnic tables, seemingly built by and for giants to enjoy their prehistoric feasts. Right then, lads and lasses. A particularly jovial Neolithic chieftain might have declared, who fancies a rather hearty spot of roasted wild boar and a few fermented berries under the comforting shade of this magnificent multi-ton capstone. We just spent the last 3 months painstakingly levering into place. Just mind your heads on the way into the chamber. Try not to disturb Great Uncle Og's eternal dreamless slumber and burial. Compartment number 3, and for goodness sake, someone make sure the sacred offering of slightly bruised hazelnuts is correctly aligned with the midwinter moonrise. The primary and most clearly understood purpose of these dolmens was as burial chambers, often for communal use by a particular family or lineage over many generations, or sometimes perhaps for a single particularly important individual. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some dolmens, particularly in regions like Brittany or Ireland, feature what is known as a porthole slab. One of antechamber's upright stones has a circular or sub-rectangular hole deliberately cut through it, sometimes just large enough for a human body to pass through, or perhaps only for offerings. The exact purpose of these intriguing portholes is still debated by archaeologists. Were they symbolic entrances or exits for the spirits of the dead, or openings for making later offerings to the interred ancestors without disturbing the main chamber? Next, we come to those most iconic and endlessly fascinating of megalithic structures. The stone circles, sometimes also referred to by the broader term cromlech, a Welsh word meaning bent flat stone, often also used for dolmens, which can get a bit confusing. So, stone circle is usually clearer. These are, as the name suggests, arrangements of standing stones placed in a circular or sometimes oval formation. They vary enormously in size, complexity, and grandeur, from small intimate circles perhaps only a few meters across, comprising just a handful of modest stones, to vast monumental enclosures like Stonehenge or Avebury in England, or the Ring of Brodgar in Orkney, Scotland, involving dozens of massive, carefully shaped and positioned monoliths. The possible purposes of these stone circles are manifold and much debated. They were almost certainly sacred ceremonial enclosures, places for communal gatherings, rituals, and perhaps religious festivals. Many show clear astronomical alignments, suggesting they functioned as sophisticated prehistoric observatories or calendrical devices used to track the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, and to mark important seasonal events like the solstices and equinoxes, which would have been crucial for early agricultural societies. Imagine the sheer dedication, Azuria, the immense communal effort, and the profound astronomical knowledge required for the planning meeting of a major new stone circle. Okay, team, for this prestigious new celestial timepiece and multi-purpose sacred gathering space, we're going to need approximately 37 perfectly shaped multi-ton sarsen stones, a further 42 slightly smaller but equally well-dressed bluestones. And yes, I know those have to be dragged a mere 150 miles overland from the Preseli Mountains in Wales. But no slacking, please. A precise astronomical alignment with the midwinter solstice sunrise over yonder conveniently located sacred hill, and preferably a suitably dramatic and appropriately misty moorland setting for maximum spiritual ambience. Any volunteers for leading the Persuade several hundred tons of uncooperative Welsh bluestone to relocate to Salisbury Plain committee? No, just me then. Oh, all right. More mead for the chief planner, I suppose? Closely related to stone circles are alignments or stone rows. These involve multiple rows of standing stones, often running roughly parallel to each other, sometimes for considerable distances, as famously seen at Carnac in Brittany, where thousands of menhirs march across the landscape in mysterious, silent ranks. Their purpose is even more enigmatic than that of stone circles, though theories include their use as processional ways leading to sacred sites, complex astronomical calendars, or perhaps territorial markers on a grand scale. And finally, we have the more elaborate burial structures known as passage graves or chamber tombs. These are often sophisticated architectural achievements featuring a distinct passage usually lined with large stone slabs leading from an entrance on the periphery of a large mound, again, a barrow or cairn, into one or more internal burial chambers. Also constructed from massive stones and often roofed with capstones or corbelled vaults. Newgrange in Ireland, which we will explore later, is a world-famous example renowned for its precise winter solstice alignment, where the rising sun illuminates the inner chamber. These passage graves were clearly sites of immense ritual importance used for communal burials over many generations, serving as powerful focal points for ancestor veneration and likely hosting ceremonies related to death, rebirth, and the cyclical nature of time. Many of them, like Newgrange, are also adorned with intricate megalithic art, spirals, chevrons, lozenges, and other abstract symbols pecked or incised into their stone surfaces, hinting at a rich symbolic and cosmological worldview. These then Egeria, the solitary menhir, the chambered dolmen, the enigmatic stone circle, the marching alignment, the sacred passage grave, are some of the primary forms taken by these giants' footprints. These megalithic wonders, they are the enduring if often silent legacy of those ancient stone builders, a testament to their ingenuity, their communal spirit, their deep connection to the land, and their profound desire to create lasting monuments that would speak, however cryptically, across the vast gulf of millennia. The peculiar dedication required to construct such massive, labor-intensive, and often seemingly non-utilitarian, in a purely practical, everyday sense, structures using only the simplest of tools, is something that continues to fill us with awe and wonder. You are now, Egeria, acquainted with the diverse and often quite awe-inspiring forms these ancient European megaliths can take. The solitary imposing menhirs standing like forgotten exclamation marks on the landscape. The chambered dolmens, those giants' picnic tables that once served as sacred tombs. The enigmatic stone circles, celestial calendars, or ceremonial enclosures. The marching alignments of Karnak. And those intricate passage graves like Newgrange, whispering of complex afterlife beliefs. You understand that these are not just random collections of very large rocks, but the intentional, enduring legacy of prehistoric stone builders' monuments that have guarded their secrets for millennia. But what possessed these ancient peoples living thousands of years before the rise of Rome or the classical civilizations of Greece to undertake such incredibly laborious, time-consuming, and seemingly non-utilitarian, in a purely practical, everyday sense, construction projects? To understand this Egeria, we must journey back to a profound transformation in human history, a shift so fundamental that it literally changed the face of the earth and the very way human societies were organized, the dawn of farming, the Neolithic Revolution. A mainstream historical fact, and one that is absolutely crucial for understanding the context of megalithic construction, is that the advent of the Neolithic period in Europe, beginning at different times in different regions, but generally taking root from around 7000 BCE in the southeast and spreading to northwestern Europe by around 4000 BCE, marked a revolutionary shift from predominantly nomadic or semi-nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyles to more settled agricultural communities. This wasn't an overnight change, of course. It was a gradual, centuries-long process. But its implications were immense. Humans began to domesticate plants, cultivating early forms of wheat, barley, lentils, and peas, and animals herding cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. This agricultural package, largely originating in the Fertile Crescent of the Near East, slowly spread across Europe, carried by migrating farmers or adopted by indigenous Mesolithic hunter-gatherer populations. So, humans invent farming. Suddenly you've got a little more theoretical free time on your hands, at least when you're not desperately trying to persuade your newly domesticated and still rather wild-eyed proto-cows not to trample your entire painstakingly planted proto-wheat crop, or engaging in complex negotiations with the local squirrel population about the precise ownership rights to your hazelnut harvest. You've also got a more reliable, if not always entirely predictable food source, mostly when the rains come and the blight stays away. And most importantly for our story, you have a very strong, almost irresistible desire to actually stay in one place for more than a single hunting season. These Egeria were the perfect conditions for someone somewhere to eventually think, you know what, this lovely new permanent village of ours with its charming wattle and daub huts and its promisingly fertile fields really needs a really big rock. Or possibly 50 of them arranged in a rather fetching circle. Just because. And also perhaps to help us figure out when to plant the aforementioned proto-wheat. How did this monumental shift to a farming way of life fuel the rise of megalithic construction? Several key factors are at play. Firstly, sedentism. Once people began to cultivate crops and raise domesticated animals, they needed to stay in one place at least for significant portions of the year to tend their fields, protect their herds, and store their harvests. This new settled lifestyle allowed for, and indeed necessitated, more permanent dwellings and community structures. And it also meant that communities could now undertake long-term ambitious construction projects, like building a massive stone tomb or erecting a complex stone circle, that would have been utterly impossible for constantly mobile hunter-gatherer bands. You can't very well construct your own personal Stonehenge Egeria if your entire village is perpetually following the migratory patterns of the notoriously unreliable and easily spooked wild aurochs. Secondly, agriculture, even in its earliest forms, had the potential to support larger, more densely populated communities. A more stable, though still vulnerable food supply could lead to population growth. These larger, more cohesive communities, often living together in established villages, could provide the substantial coordinated labor force required for the immense undertakings of quarrying, transporting dressing shaping, and erecting multi-ton megalithic stones, often using only the simplest of tools. Stone axes, wooden levers, ropes made of plant fibers or animal hides, and an enormous amount of human muscle power and sheer collective willpower. Imagine the Neolithic project manager, if such a title existed, trying to coordinate the construction of a new community dolmen. All right, team. He, or perhaps even she in some more egalitarian Neolithic societies, might announce at the morning briefing after a fortifying breakfast of slightly gritty barley porridge. Today's exciting agenda includes firstly persuading that rather recalcitrant 40-ton capstone, which we cleverly quarried from the sacred mountain 3 miles uphill from here to kindly allow itself to be gently levered onto a series of very sturdy, if somewhat unpredictably rolling logs. Secondly, we need approximately 200 able-bodied volunteers to enthusiastically pull on these slightly frayed hide ropes with a great deal of synchronized grunting and rhythmic chanting. And thirdly, and this is the really crucial bit, we need to ensure that Great Uncle Og, who has a tendency towards over-enthusiastic levering and a less than perfect understanding of basic physics, does not inadvertently cause said 40-ton capstone to roll backwards and flatten our entire newly planted turnip field. Safety third, everyone honoring the sacred ancestors and getting this magnificent tomb completed before the next winter solstice comes first. Thirdly, successful agriculture could at least in good years produce a food surplus. This surplus, however modest, was revolutionary. It meant that not every single member of the community had to be directly involved in food production all the time. This allowed for the emergence of specialization of labor. Some individuals might become skilled artisans, potters, toolmakers, or very relevant to our story, ritual specialists, priests, shamans, or even early engineers and architects who could plan design and oversee the construction of these monumental stone structures. The community could afford to support these specialists, and their labor could be diverted to these large-scale, non-subsistence projects. Hooray! A Neolithic farmer might exclaim, surveying his surprisingly bountiful, if still rather lumpy and slightly mildewed harvest of emmer wheat. We have a magnificent surplus of approximately 3 extra baskets of slightly questionable grain this year. What shall we do with this unprecedented wealth? Shall we have a truly epic week-long village feast? Shall we perhaps attempt to invent beer a few millennia ahead of schedule? No, I have a much better idea. Let's use all this extra energy and collective goodwill to go and painstakingly drag several dozen absolutely enormous stones across the rather challenging local landscape to build a truly impressive and astronomically aligned tomb for our recently departed and greatly respected, if somewhat grumpy, Great Aunt Griselda. She always did appreciate a room with a really good long-term view, even if it is primarily of the inside of a very large, very dark, stone-lined mound for the rest of eternity. But perhaps most importantly, Egeria. The shift to a farming lifestyle brought about profound changes in people's relationship with the land, with time and with their ancestors, all of which likely fueled new belief systems and ritual needs that found expression in megalithic monuments. Settled communities developed deep, enduring ties to specific territories to the ancestral lands that now sustained them. This may have led to a greater emphasis on ancestor veneration, with megalithic tombs like dolmens and passage graves serving as permanent, highly visible monuments to the dead houses for the ancestors, and focal points for communal rituals that reinforced lineage identity and connection to the land. The precise and often complex relationship between the widespread adoption of early agriculture and the initial, often contemporaneous emergence of megalithic burial practices and monument construction in many different parts of Neolithic and Bronze Age Europe. Whether megalith building was a direct, almost inevitable socio-religious consequence of the new settled farming way of life, and its attendant concerns with land tenure and ancestral lineage, or if perhaps some pre-existing Mesolithic hunter-gatherer. Traditions of less monumental but still significant sacred sites and burial customs also played a crucial formative role in its subsequent development and regional diversification. It is a fascinating and highly complex question, still actively researched and vigorously debated by European prehistorians. The cyclical nature of agriculture, the planting, growth, harvest, and winter dormancy, would also have heightened awareness of seasonal changes and celestial movements. Stone circles and alignments, many of which show clear astronomical orientations to the solstices' equinoxes, or significant lunar standstills, likely served as sophisticated calendrical devices helping these early farmers to track the seasons, predict optimal times for planting and harvesting, and conduct the necessary communal rituals to ensure agricultural fertility and cosmic harmony. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some early Neolithic farming communities in parts of Europe lived in incredibly substantial timber longhouses, often hundreds of feet long, designed to house not just an extended family group, but sometimes also their precious livestock under the same roof. The immense effort and communal coordination required to fell the massive timbers, shape them with stone tools, and erect these huge wooden structures also clearly demonstrates a well-developed capacity for large-scale communal labor and sophisticated construction, planning a set of skills and social organization that would have been directly transferable to the later, even more ambitious task of megalith building. The peculiar and truly astonishing investment of so much time, labor, and communal resources into quarrying, transporting often over remarkable distances and erecting these colossal stone structures, often for purposes that were primarily religious, ceremonial, or symbolic rather than purely utilitarian, speaks volumes about the profound spiritual beliefs, the complex social organization, and the sheer determination of these early European farming communities. The dawn of farming didn't just change how people got their food, Egeria, it fundamentally reshaped their world, their societies, their beliefs, and it gave them both the means and perhaps the profound new motivations to begin leaving their indelible, enigmatic, and truly giant footprints upon the ancient landscapes of Europe. You are now, Egeria, beginning to feel the profound shift in human existence that came with the dawn of farming in Neolithic Europe. You understand that this transition to a more settled agricultural way of life, with its potential for larger communities and a food surplus, however modest and precarious, provided the crucial social and economic context, the very foundation that made the construction of those enigmatic megalithic monuments. The menhirs, dolmens, stone circles, and passage graves we've defined, even conceivable. But acknowledging the why these ancient peoples might have wanted to build such structures, perhaps for ancestor veneration, seasonal rituals, or territorial marking, as we'll explore later, still leaves us with a rather large and often quite literally multi-ton question. Just how on earth did they actually do it? How did these prehistoric communities, equipped only with the simplest of tools, manage to quarry transport often over considerable distances, and then precisely erect these colossal giants of stone? Prepare yourself, Jiraiya, for a sleepy contemplation of some truly incredible and often quite baffling feats of Neolithic and Bronze Age engineering. A mainstream historical fact, and one that continues to inspire immense admiration and considerable scholarly head-scratching, is that these prehistoric megalith builders, despite lacking metal tools in the earliest phases of megalithic construction, copper and bronze tools came later, and iron much later still, and certainly possessing no wheeled vehicles for heavy transport, no complex cranes, no powered machinery, and no handy instruction manuals from ancient engineering for dummies, somehow managed to successfully quarry meticulously, transport and skillfully erect stones, weighing many, many tons, sometimes even hundreds of tons for the largest examples. Their primary resources were an intimate knowledge of their local geology, an ingenious application of basic physics levers ramps, counterweights an immense supply of coordinated human labor, and one must assume an absolutely unwavering, almost fanatical degree of communal determination and shared belief in the importance of their monumental undertakings. Let's start at the beginning of the process of quarrying the stones. Imagine yourself Egeria at a Neolithic quarry site, perhaps on a granite outcrop in Brittany, or amidst the sarsen fields of the Marlborough Downs in England. The first task is to select a suitable stone, one of the right size, shape, and quality. Then comes the incredibly laborious process of detaching it from the bedrock or the surrounding earth. This was often achieved using a combination of techniques. One method was fire setting, building a large, intense fire against the rock face, then suddenly dousing it with cold water. The rapid temperature change would cause the rock to crack and splinter, allowing smaller pieces to be broken off or larger fissures to be exploited. Another technique involved using harder stone mauls and hammers, often made of dolerite or other tough igneous rocks, to repeatedly pound away at the target stone, gradually wearing it down or creating grooves. Once a groove or crack was established, wooden wedges would be driven into it. These wedges would then be soaked with water, causing them to swell with immense force, eventually splitting the massive block away from its parent rock. It was slow, patient, backbreaking work requiring not just brute strength, but also a deep intuitive understanding of the stone's grain and cleavage planes. Once your chosen multi-ton monolith was finally freed, Egeria, the next even more daunting challenge arose, transporting this giant from the quarry to its final destination, which could sometimes be many miles away, often over difficult, uneven terrain. The precise methods and the exact level of sophisticated engineering knowledge possessed and employed by various megalithic builder communities for some of their most ambitious and logistically challenging stone constructions, such as, for example, the exact techniques used for precisely aligning the massive stones of complex stone circles with distant and subtle astronomical events like specific lunar standstills, or for successfully lifting and securely placing the heaviest multi-ton capstones atop the uprights of dolmens and the lintels of passage graves without catastrophic structural failure, continue to be subjects of intense archaeological investigation, detailed experimental reconstruction projects, and sometimes, it must be said, rather imaginative and occasionally quite outlandish theoretical speculation. However, some core methods are widely accepted. The most fundamental requirement was immense coordinated human manpower. Dozens, perhaps even hundreds of people from the community would be needed, all working together, pulling, pushing, levering, and chanting, one assumes, with a great deal of encouraging rhythm keeping and possibly slightly desperate sacred songs. A common theory for overland transport involves the use of wooden rollers. Numerous logs placed beneath the massive stone, allowing it to be slowly, painstakingly rolled forward, as the logs from behind were continuously moved to the front. Another method likely involved constructing wooden sledges upon which the stone could be securely lashed, and then dragging these sledges over specially prepared trackways, perhaps made of timber beams or smoothed earth, which might even have been lubricated with water or animal fat to reduce friction. And of course, vast quantities of strong rope, likely made from plaited plant fibers like nettle or lime bast or animal hides, would have been absolutely essential for pulling, guiding, and securing these colossal loads. Moving a 40-ton sarsen stone in the heart of Neolithic Wiltshire, Egeria, wasn't exactly a casual job for your average, slightly out of shape weekend DIY enthusiast with a rented pickup truck and a vague hope for the best. Oh no, it was much more along the lines of, all right, everyone, men, women, and any particularly strong and cooperative teenagers on the count of precisely 3 well-timed grunts from Chief Stone Mover. Og. 1, 2, and lift. This would then be followed by a great deal of truly impressive synchronized groaning, the alarming creak and possible snapping of several very large, very important hide ropes, and probably a collective, deeply heartfelt and entirely understandable prayer to the great Earth Mother, the Sky Father, and any nearby benevolent tree spirits for divine assistance in not inadvertently squashing anyone's particularly valuable Neolithic foot. Where possible, water transport would have been a far more efficient option for very heavy or long-distance movements. If stones were quarried near a river or a coastline, they could be maneuvered onto large log rafts or sturdy shallow draft boats, perhaps hide-covered carracks or dugout canoes, though the scale for very large stones is debated, and then floated or poled closer to their final destination. The famous bluestones of Stonehenge, for example, those smaller though still multi-ton volcanic stones that form an inner circle, were transported an astonishing distance of over 150 miles from the Preseli Hills in Wales, a journey that almost certainly involved a significant component of water transport along the Bristol Channel and various rivers in addition to overland hauling. Finally, after weeks, months, or perhaps even years of quarrying and transporting, your giant stone arrives at the sacred site. Now comes the equally challenging task of erecting it. For upright stones like menhirs or the sarsens of a stone circle, a large pit would first be dug. The base of the stone would then be carefully maneuvered over this pit, often using levers and perhaps a temporary timber ramp or scaffold. Then, with a great deal of pulling on ropes from one side and perhaps pushing or levering from the other, the stone would be slowly, precariously tilted and guided until it slid or dropped into the prepared hole. Once upright, the pit would be tightly packed with smaller stones, earth, and rubble to secure it firmly in place. For placing massive horizontal capstones on dolmens or lintels on trilithons like at Stonehenge, earthen or timber ramps would likely have been constructed up which the capstone could be dragged or rolled into position. Alternatively, some scholars suggest the use of complex lever and counterweight systems, or perhaps even sturdy A-frames or shear legs made of timber, to hoist these heavy slabs into place. The builders of Stonehenge, as we'll see, even employed sophisticated mortise and tenon joints and tongue and groove techniques to secure the lintels to the uprights, a level of stonemasonry skill that is truly astonishing for a prehistoric people supposedly lacking advanced metal tools for such precise work. Finding those carefully carved joints on the massive Stonehenge lintels Egeria must have absolutely blown the minds of early archaeologists. It's like discovering that your supposedly primitive Neolithic ancestors were actually highly skilled master carpenters, but they just happened to prefer working with multi-ton rocks instead of easily manageable pieces of wood, and they probably possessed a really good set of Neolithic stone chisels, an almost supernatural degree of patience, and an incredibly accurate sense of measurement. A quirky or fringe tidbit Egeria is that numerous experimental archaeology projects around the world have attempted to replicate these megalithic transport and erection techniques using only authentically reconstructed prehistoric tools and methods. These experiments, while often fascinating and providing valuable insights, have almost invariably demonstrated just how incredibly challenging, time-consuming, resource-intensive, and labor-demanding these ancient undertakings truly were. They often required dozens or even hundreds of highly motivated and well-coordinated people to move even a moderately sized stone a relatively short distance, and they involve a great deal of trial and error. And probably in the original Neolithic context, quite a few unfortunately bruised or even tragically crushed prehistoric toes and fingers along the way. The sheer organizational skill, the communal dedication, the shared belief or purpose that must have driven these Neolithic and Bronze Age peoples to invest such an extraordinary amount of their time, energy, and resources into these colossal stone-moving projects, Egeria, is perhaps the most awe-inspiring aspect of all. It speaks of societies with a strong sense of collective identity, a powerful spiritual worldview, and leaders capable of mobilizing and directing immense human effort towards a common sacred goal. They were truly hauling giants, both literally and metaphorically. You are now Egeria fully versed in the sheer backbreaking, almost mind-boggling effort that went into quarrying, transporting, and erecting those colossal, megalithic stones across prehistoric Europe. You've imagined the immense human labor, the ingenious, if rudimentary engineering techniques involving rollers, sledges, levers, and ramps, and the profound communal dedication that must have fueled these monumental undertakings by Neolithic and Bronze Age peoples. Having pondered the how it is now time to journey in our sleepy contemplation to perhaps the most famous, most iconic, and most endlessly debated megalithic monument in the entire world, the magnificent, sun-kissed, and often rain-swept stone circle of Stonehenge rising in solitary grandeur from the rolling chalk downlands of Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England. A mainstream historical fact, and one that solidifies its global importance, is that Stonehenge is a prehistoric monument of extraordinary complexity, constructed in several distinct phases over a vast period, spanning roughly from around 3000 BCE to about 1600 BCE. This wasn't just a quick weekend DIY project by a few enthusiastic Neolithic farmers, it was a multi-generational evolving sacred endeavor. It is renowned for its massive sarsen trilithons, 2 upright stones with a horizontal lintel stone on top, and its inner horseshoe and outer circle of bluestones, all meticulously arranged with remarkable precision. And its primary axis is famously aligned with the sunrise on the summer solstice, and conversely the sunset on the winter solstice, indicating a profound and sophisticated astronomical understanding on the part of its ancient builders. The initial planning meeting for Stonehenge Egeria, if such a formal event ever occurred, it was probably more a series of divinely inspired visions and very persuasive pronouncements by a particularly charismatic Neolithic chief or priest architect. Must have been quite something. Okay, chaps, and perhaps a few equally dedicated chapesses. The visionary leader might have declared unrolling a rather vague map drawn on a piece of stretched animal hide. I've had a truly brilliant, if somewhat ambitious idea. We are going to construct a magnificent world-class circular stone temple right here on this rather lovely, if somewhat windswept patch of Salisbury Plain. It needs to align perfectly with the precise moment of the summer solstice sunrise. It will involve us dragging some absolutely enormous multi-ton sarsen rocks about 20 miles overland from the Marlborough Downs. And also, just for a bit of extra fun, and to make it truly unique, let's also go and fetch some slightly smaller but still impressively heavy special bluestones, all the way from the Preseli Hills in distant Wales, which is only about, a mere 150 miles away, involving a delightful combination of overland hauling and possibly some rather precarious sea rafting. Any questions? No excellent right then who wants to be on the Persuade 40 Tons of Sarsen to Move committee, and who fancies a bracingly long walk to Wales. Do pass the fermented berry juice and let's get to work. Imagine yourself Egeria, witnessing the different phases of its construction. The very earliest stage, around 3000 BCE, involved the creation of a large circular earthwork henge, a ditch and bank enclosure, with a ring of 56 pits just inside the bank known today as the Aubrey Holes, named after the 17th century antiquarian John Aubrey who first noted them. These pits may have originally held timber posts or perhaps even some of those mysterious bluestones in an earlier arrangement. Then, around 2500 BCE, or slightly later, began the truly monumental stone building phases. The smaller bluestones weighing up to 4 tons each made of dolerite, and other volcanic rocks were transported that astonishing distance from the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales. The exact route and method of this incredible journey is still debated, but it almost certainly involved a combination of overland, dragging on sledges and rollers, and water transport on rafts, or boats along the Welsh coast across the Bristol Channel, and then up rivers like the Avon. Around the same time, or perhaps slightly later, came the even more impressive feat of quarrying, transporting, and erecting the massive sarsen stones. These are huge blocks of hard silicified sandstone, some weighing over 40 tons, which were sourced from the Marlborough Downs about 20 miles north of Stonehenge. These form the famous outer circle of uprights and lintels, and the even more imposing inner horseshoe of 5 massive trilithons, whose tallest uprights reach over 20 feet above the ground. The sarsens were not just crudely erected, they were carefully shaped and dressed using stone mauls, and in an astonishing display of prehistoric stonemasonry, the lintels were secured to the uprights using mortise and tenon joints, a projection on one stone fitting into a hole on another, and tongue and groove joints where adjacent lintels interlocked, techniques usually associated with woodworking here, applied to multi-ton stone. And of course, there are the famous astronomical alignments. As you stand within the silent circle Agraya, perhaps on a misty summer dawn, you can imagine the ancient peoples gathering. As the sun begins to rise on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, its first rays would have shone directly down the main axis of the monument, through the great trilithons and aligned with the outlying heelstone, a large unworked sarsen standing to the northeast of the main circle. It's like the ultimate Neolithic solar-powered alarm clock. But instead of an annoying repetitive beeping sound, you get a truly glorious, awe-inspiring, divinely sanctioned sunrise spectacular, probably followed by some very important, deeply sacred rituals involving chanting offerings and perhaps the ceremonial consumption of specially prepared and hopefully not too gritty solstice oatcakes. Conversely, the alignment also works for the sunset on the winter solstice, the shortest day, marking another crucial turning point in the agricultural and ceremonial year. The precise functions and full range of symbolic meanings embedded within Stonehenge's various components and its intricate astronomical alignments, particularly the exact nature of the specific ceremonies and rituals that were actually performed there by its Neolithic and Bronze Age builders. Across its many different phases of construction use and modification over some 1,500 years, remain subjects of intense ongoing archaeological research, detailed scientific investigation, including sophisticated archaeoastronomical modeling, and diverse, often quite passionate scholarly interpretations, despite centuries of dedicated study. While the solar alignments are the most famous, some researchers have also proposed more complex lunar alignments, suggesting the monument might have been used to predict eclipses or track the complex 18.6-year cycle of the moon's major standstills. The level of sophisticated long-term astronomical observation and precise engineering required to achieve these alignments with such rudimentary tools is truly staggering. What was the purpose of this immense undertaking? It was almost certainly a temple, a sacred site dedicated to the worship of sun gods, sky deities, or perhaps earth mother goddesses. A place where the cycles of nature and the cosmos were revered and their power invoked. It was also clearly a burial ground, at least in its earlier phases. Cremated human remains have been found in many of the Aubrey holes and within the surrounding ditch, suggesting it served as an important ancestral monument, a place where the living could connect with the spirits of their dead. Some have even suggested it was a healing center, with the bluestones brought from so far away perhaps believed to possess special curative properties, drawing sick or injured pilgrims from across the land. And it was undoubtedly a place of communal assembly, a focal point for a large region where different groups could gather for major festivals, ceremonies, and perhaps even for trade or social alliances. A quirky or fringe tidbit, though one that dominated popular imagination for centuries, is the persistent association of Stonehenge with the Druids, those Celtic priests of Iron Age Britain. The aforementioned John Aubrey in the 17th century was one of the first to scientifically survey the site, and he somewhat romantically and entirely incorrectly attributed its construction to these enigmatic figures. This idea was popularized by later antiquarians like William Stukeley, and became deeply embedded in folklore-inspiring paintings, poems, and even modern neo-Druidic ceremonies at the site. However, modern archaeology has definitively shown that Stonehenge was built and used thousands of years before the Druids of the Iron Age even existed. The true builders were far more ancient, their specific beliefs largely lost to us, except for what these magnificent stones themselves can whisper. As you stand there, Egeria, amidst these colossal sun-kissed, or perhaps rain-lashed and wind-swept stones, you feel an undeniable connection to that incredibly distant human past. A sense of awe at the dedication, the skill, and the profound spiritual vision of the people who conceived and constructed this enduring wonder of the prehistoric world. Modern tourists at Stonehenge often gaze in bewildered amazement. Wow, this is absolutely incredible. Was it built by aliens? Did Merlin the magician just wave his wand and make the stones appear? Or perhaps it was constructed by a race of incredibly strong, architecturally ambitious giants who were really into minimalist landscape design. The Neolithic and Bronze Age builders listening perhaps from the great beyond are probably just sighing with a mixture of pride and slight exasperation and thinking, actually, my dear 21st century friends, it was mostly just exceptionally clever use of levers rollers, a great deal of very strong rope, an incredibly well-organized communal workforce with a shared spiritual vision, and several centuries of very hard work. But sure, aliens and magic sound cool too, I guess, if that makes the story more exciting for you. Stonehenge in its silent grandeur continues to guard its deepest secrets. The iconic sun-kissed, or perhaps more realistically for Salisbury Plain, often rain-lashed and wind-swept grandeur of Stonehenge has now firmly imprinted itself upon your sleepy prehistoric imagination and Jarea. You've marveled at its colossal sarsen trilithons, pondered the mysterious origins of its Welsh bluestones, and felt the profound resonance of its precise astronomical alignments with the solstices, a testament to the sophisticated engineering and deep cosmological understanding of its Neolithic and Bronze Age builders. It is without a doubt a true wonder of the ancient world, a place that continues to guard its deepest secrets with a silent, stony dignity. But our journey through the mysterious megalithic landscapes of Europe is far from over. Just a relatively short distance away from Stonehenge, nestled within the same chalk downlands of Wiltshire in southern England, lies another even larger, arguably more complex, and in some ways even more enigmatic sacred site from the same ancient period, the vast sprawling ceremonial landscape of Avebury. If Stonehenge is a precisely engineered, almost austerely formal celestial temple, then Avebury Egeria is its bigger, slightly wilder, more organically sprawling country cousin. The one who decided that a single perfectly arranged stone circle simply wasn't nearly dramatic enough and thought, you know what this already quite impressive Neolithic landscape really needs? About 100 more absolutely enormous, largely unshaped sarsen stones. A truly colossal circular ditch you could quite comfortably lose a small herd of particularly dim-witted sheep in, and perhaps a couple of really long, rather grand stone driveways leading off into the middle distance towards other equally mysterious sacred spots, obviously. More is definitely more when it comes to making a statement to the gods and your Neolithic neighbors. A mainstream historical fact, and one that often surprises visitors familiar only with Stonehenge, is that Avebury in Wiltshire is in fact a Neolithic henge monument of truly immense scale, containing not one but 3 stone circles, including what was once the largest stone circle in all of Europe, all encompassed by a massive circular earthwork bank and a deep internal ditch. It forms the heart of a wider prehistoric sacred landscape that includes other significant Neolithic monuments such as Silbury Hill, the largest man-made prehistoric mound in Europe, West Kennet Long Barrow, a major communal tomb and ceremonial stone avenues, all dating primarily from the 3rd millennium BCE, making it broadly contemporary with Stonehenge's main sarsen stone construction phase. Imagine yourself Egeria approaching Avebury. Unlike Stonehenge, which stands in relative if highly managed isolation on the plain, Avebury is a monument that dramatically embraces and is embraced by the living landscape. In fact, part of the modern village of Avebury, with its charming thatched cottages, its ancient church, and its very welcoming pub, is located directly inside the massive earthwork henge and amongst the remaining great stones of the outer circle. Living in Avebury Village today must be quite a unique experience. Oh, excuse me there, Mrs. Higgins? A slightly flustered archaeologist might politely inquire of a local resident, if it wouldn't be too much trouble, could you perhaps ask your prize-winning and rather territorial petunias to kindly refrain from growing quite so enthusiastically around the base of that particularly significant 4,500-year-old sacred Neolithic standing stone currently residing in your front garden? It's just that it's slightly obscuring the view for the archaeologically inclined tourists, and also, we think it might be aligned with a minor lunar standstill, but only if the petunias aren't blocking the crucial ley line you see. As you begin to explore Avebury, the first thing that strikes you is the sheer scale of its great henge earthwork. This is a massive circular bank, originally perhaps some 30 feet high, with an equally impressive deep internal ditch, meaning the ditch is on the inside of the bank. A feature that suggests its primary purpose was ceremonial or symbolic, rather than defensive, as a defensive ditch would normally be on the outside. This colossal earthwork, over a kilometer in circumference, encloses a vast area of nearly 30 acres. Creating it involved excavating and moving hundreds of thousands of tons of chalk rubble using only antler picks, animal shoulder blade shovels, and woven baskets. An almost unbelievable feat of communal labor. Within this great henge once stood the outer stone circle, originally composed of around 100 massive, unworked or only roughly shaped sarsen stones, some weighing over 40 tons, similar to those at Stonehenge, but generally left in their more natural, rugged forms. The builders of Avebury were clearly less into the whole meticulously shaping, dressing, and fitting every single multi-ton stone with complex mortise and tenon joints kind of vibe that so obsessed their counterparts down the road at Stonehenge. Their approach seems to have been more along the lines of, oh look, that's a particularly nice, impressively large, and interestingly lumpy sarsen boulder just lying there in the field. Let's just collectively grunt a bit, lever it upright with a few very large tree trunks, and wedge it firmly into the ground right about here. Perfect. It adds a certain rustic charm and an undeniable air of primal, untamed power, don't you think? Sadly, many of these magnificent outer stones are now missing, having been toppled and broken up by local farmers in the 17th and 18th centuries for building materials, or deliberately buried in deep pits to clear the land for agriculture. A tragic loss that the antiquarian William Stuckley, who meticulously surveyed Avebury in the early 18th century before much of this destruction took place, lamented with great passion. A quirky or fringe tidbit regarding this later destruction is that one rather gruesome method employed by these 17th and 18th century stonebreakers involved digging a large pit beside a targeted standing stone, then lighting intense fires against the base of the stone, and suddenly dousing it with cold water to crack it, before finally toppling the weakened giant into the pit and burying it. It was a brutal, if effective, way of dealing with these inconveniently large and spiritually suspect prehistoric remnants. Inside this vast outer circle Egeria were two smaller but still very impressive inner stone circles. The northern inner circle originally contained a central feature known as the Cove. 3 massive stones arranged in a box-like setting with a tall central monolith. The southern inner circle also had a large central monolith known as the Obelisk, though it's long gone in other complex internal stone settings. The precise purpose of these inner circles and their central features is still debated, but they were clearly focal points for specific rituals or ceremonies within the larger sacred enclosure. And then there are the avenues. Leading away from the main henge were at least 2 ceremonial avenues formed by parallel rows of paired standing stones. The most famous and best preserved of these is the West Kennet Avenue, which once consisted of about 100 pairs of sarsens, marching for over 1.5 miles across the landscape, in a slightly sinuous path leading southeastwards from an entrance in the henge towards another important Neolithic site known as the Sanctuary, which itself went through phases as both a timber circle and later stone circles. Imagine processing along this ancient stone-lined way, Egeria part of a Neolithic community, moving towards a sacred ceremony, the great stones guiding your path. The other avenue, the Beckhampton Avenue, led westwards from the henge, though far less of it now survives. The precise ritual functions and the overarching symbolic meaning of Avebury's incredibly complex and sprawling layout, including its massive concentric stone circles, its enormous surrounding earthworks, its enigmatic internal features like the Cove, and its long ceremonial avenues connecting it to other significant nodes within the wider sacred landscape, and exactly how these different elements interacted to serve the diverse social, religious, and perhaps even astronomical needs of the surrounding Neolithic communities over many centuries remain subjects of profound, ongoing archaeological investigation, detailed landscape analysis, and diverse theoretical interpretation. With theories ranging from it being a site for vast seasonal gatherings and communal feasting, a complex astronomical observatory, mapping solar and lunar cycles, a ritual center for ancestor veneration linked to nearby burial mounds, or perhaps even a symbolic representation of the entire cosmos as understood by its builders. Unlike the more focused, almost architectural feel of Stonehenge, with its carefully dressed stones and lintels, Avebury has a wilder, more organic, more landscape-integrated quality. Its largely unshaped stones seem to grow out of the earth itself, an integral part of the rolling chalk hills. While it also has astronomical alignments, its primary impact is perhaps more chthonic, more connected to the earth, to processions, to vast communal gatherings within its enormous embrace. The very fact that a modern village now nestles comfortably within its ancient banks and among its remaining stones only adds to its peculiar timeless charm, a place where millennia of human history coexist in a gentle, if somewhat an anachronistic jumble. It is a place to wander, to ponder, and to feel the deep, quiet pulse of Neolithic Britain. The vast, almost overwhelming sacred landscape of Avebury in Wiltshire, Egeria with its colossal earthwork henge, its multiple stone circles, and its ancient ceremonial avenues has now given you a profound sense of the sheer scale and communal dedication involved in Neolithic Britain's megalithic endeavors. You've imagined wandering within its great earthen embrace, feeling the ancient power of its largely unshaped sarsen stones, a place where an entire village now nestles amidst the remnants of a prehistoric sacred center. But the megalithic builders of ancient Europe were a diverse and endlessly inventive group, and their monumental expressions in stone took many forms. Our sleepy historical pilgrimage now carries us across the choppy waters of what we now call the English Channel, to the rugged, windswept, and legend-haunted coastline of Brittany in northwestern France. Here near the village of Carnac, you will encounter a megalithic phenomenon quite different in its visual impact. From the circles of Britain, yet equally if not more enigmatic and awe-inspiring. The incredible, almost unbelievable stone alignments, vast stone armies, marching in silent, serried ranks across the landscape. A mainstream historical fact, and one that makes Carnac a site of global archaeological importance, is that the Carnac alignments consist of several extensive and highly complex systems of standing stones or menhirs, meticulously arranged in roughly parallel rows, some of which stretch for several kilometers across the countryside. Dating primarily to the Neolithic period, roughly between 4500 BCE and 3300 BCE, making them broadly contemporary with, or even slightly earlier, than some phases of Avebury and the initial stages of Stonehenge. These alignments represent one of the largest, most densely packed, and most mysterious megalithic complexes anywhere in the world. The sheer number of stones involved is staggering. Originally many thousands, with over 3,000 still standing today, despite the ravages of time agriculture and later stone robbing. The builders of Carnac Egeria were clearly not content with just one or two impressively large, thoughtfully positioned standing stones to mark a sacred spot. Oh no. They were more like, you know what would be really truly monumentally cool and would undoubtedly impress both the gods and our slightly less ambitious Neolithic neighbors down the coast, thousands of them. Yes, thousands upon thousands of carefully selected granite menhirs, all arranged in really, really long, impeccably straight, mostly lines, stretching as far as the eye can see and then some. Because we clearly have an enormous number of readily available stones, an almost supernatural amount of communal free time on our Neolithic hands, and a deep abiding and possibly slightly obsessive passion for large-scale geological redecoration projects. As you begin to explore the Carnac region, Egeria, you'll discover that these are not just one single continuous alignment, but several distinct major groups, each with its own character and layout often named after nearby hamlets. The most famous of these include Lemenec. This is perhaps the most iconic of the Carnac alignments located at the western end of the main complex. It consists of 11 roughly parallel rows of standing stones, fanning out slightly as they run for over a kilometer, about 0.7 miles, in an east-northeast to west-southwest direction. The stones here are generally smaller at the western end and gradually increase in height towards the east, some reaching over 12 feet tall. Intriguingly, the lemenic alignment is terminated at both its western and eastern ends by the remains of what appear to be cromlechs, or semicircular stone enclosures, though these are now quite dilapidated. Kermario. A short distance to the east of Lemenek lies the Kermario alignment, another truly impressive array of stones, featuring 10 rows running for a similar distance. Some of the largest individual menhirs of the entire Karnak complex are found here, including one that would have stood over 20 feet high before it fell. The Kermario alignment also seems to be associated with a nearby megalithic tomb. A dolmen and a prominent viewing platform or mound, suggesting a connection between these rows of stones and funerary or ancestral rituals. Kurliskan further east again. You encounter the Kurliskan alignment. This is somewhat shorter and more compact than Lemenek or Kermario, with 13 rows of stones. But it is also associated with a large, roughly rectangular stone enclosure at its western end, adding another layer of complexity to its possible function. And then there's Le Petit Menek, another smaller alignment found further to the east, suggesting that this entire landscape was once a vast, interconnected ceremonial precinct. The stones themselves are mostly local granite, weathered and gray, often covered in lichen, their rugged, unshaped forms. Unlike the dressed sarsens of Stonehenge giving them a raw, primal power, the visual impact of these thousands upon thousands of stones marching in their silent, orderly ranks across the undulating, gorse-covered heathland, sometimes disappearing over a rise only to reappear on the next, is utterly unique and profoundly mysterious. It truly does feel like you are witnessing ancient stone armies, frozen in mid-march by some long-forgotten enchantment. Trying to count all the individual stones at Karnak Egeria is probably a task best left to exceptionally patient sheep with a particular talent for quantitative analysis, or perhaps to very dedicated archaeologists armed with an extremely good head for numbers, a highly detailed GPS mapping system, and a very, very comfortable pair of walking boots. Right then is that impressively lichen-covered granite slabstone numbered Tausube, 973 in row number 7 of the Kermario alignment. Or did I perhaps already count that particular one yesterday afternoon, when the dappled sunlight was hitting it from a slightly different and potentially more numerically confusing angle? But what on earth was the purpose of this immense, almost obsessive undertaking? Why did these Neolithic peoples of Brittany invest such an extraordinary amount of labor and communal effort into arranging so many stones in such long, seemingly endless ordered lines? This Egeria is the great enduring mystery of Karnak. The precise function and the deep symbolic intent behind the vast and intricate Karnak alignments, whether they primarily served as sophisticated astronomical calendars, or observatories mapping complex solar and lunar cycles, or perhaps as grand ceremonial processional ways guiding ritual participants between different sacred sites, or towards specific landscape features like the sea or prominent burial mounds, or maybe as immense territorial markers defining the boundaries of different social groups or chiefdoms, or even as symbolic representations of ancestral journeys, cosmological concepts, or perhaps even as some more imaginative theories proposed as a way of channeling telluric earth energies, remain subjects of intense archaeological investigation, diverse scholarly interpretations, and often quite spirited academic debate, with no single universally accepted theory yet emerging to fully explain their enigmatic grandeur. Many theories, of course, involve astronomical alignments. The general east-west orientation of many of the rules in the presence of terminal cromlechs have led some researchers to suggest they were used to track the rising and setting of the sun and moon at significant times of the year, perhaps marking solstices, equinoxes, or important lunar standstills, thereby serving as a vast open-air Neolithic calendar, crucial for agricultural cycles and an understanding of cosmic order. Others emphasize their likely role as ceremonial or processional ways. Imagine ancient rituals involving large numbers of people moving slowly and solemnly along these stone-lined avenues, perhaps towards a sacred tomb, a special natural feature, or the sea itself, which is never far away in this coastal region. The stones would have guided and framed these important communal performances. The close proximity of many alignments to significant burial mounds and dolmens, like the great Kirkido tumulus near Kermario, which is one of the oldest megalithic tombs in the region, strongly suggests a connection to ancestor veneration and funerary rituals. Perhaps the rows of stones represented the spirits of the ancestors themselves, or pathways leading to their realm. A quirky or fringe tidbit that captures the popular imagination, and indeed the visual impression these stones often create, is the local Breton folklore which holds that the Karnak stones are actually a Roman legion, or sometimes a pagan army that was magically turned to stone by Saint Cornelius, the patron saint of Karnak, and also rather appropriately of cattle, or sometimes by the great wizard Merlin. This beautifully captures their uncanny resemblance to endless ranks of soldiers frozen in mid-march across the landscape for all eternity. Whatever their original purpose now lost to us in the deep mists of prehistory, the Karnak alignments stand as a breathtaking testament to the organizational capacity, the engineering skill, the profound spiritual beliefs, and the sheer, almost incomprehensible dedication of the Neolithic people who created them. They were not content with just a few impressive stones. They felt compelled to mark their landscape with thousands, creating a monument of truly peculiar and unforgettable grandeur, a silent army guarding the secrets of ancient Brittany. The vast, enigmatic stone armies of Karnak and Brittany Agraria, with their thousands of menhirs marching in silent parallel rows across the landscape for kilometers, have now left their indelible if deeply puzzling imprint upon your sleepy historical imagination. You've pondered their mysterious purpose. Were they astronomical calendars, grand processional ways, territorial markers, or perhaps even symbolic representations of ancestral journeys? The stones, as always, guard their deepest secrets with a profound, weathered silence. But our journey through the megalithic wonders of prehistoric Europe is not yet over. We must now cross the choppy waters of the Irish Sea, leaving the shores of Brittany behind, and make our way to the lush green and legend-haunted island of Ireland. Specifically to the fertile valley of the River Boyne, an area known in Irish as Brúna Boinne, the palace or mansion of the Boyne. Here, amidst a rich complex of Neolithic monuments, stands one of the most extraordinary, most precisely engineered, and most spiritually resonant passage tombs in the entire world: the Great Mound of Newgrange, a veritable lightbox designed to capture the very essence of the winter sun. A mainstream historical fact, and one that continually astounds visitors and scholars alike, is that Newgrange, located in County Meath, Ireland, is an incredibly ancient passage tomb dating back to approximately 3200 BCE. This makes it significantly older than the sarsen stone faces of Stonehenge in England, and even older than the Great Pyramids of Giza in Egypt. It stands as a testament to the remarkable sophistication, engineering prowess, and profound cosmological understanding of the Neolithic farming communities who built it over 5 millennia ago. The Neolithic builders of Newgrange, Ageria, clearly went to an almost unbelievable amount of trouble to perfectly align their magnificent tomb with the precise moment of the winter solstice sunrise. You just know that half the time, given the famously, shall we say, unpredictable nature of Irish weather, it was probably completely stubbornly overcast on that crucial sacred morning. You can almost picture a very determined and increasingly damp Neolithic priest or priestess standing there in the pre-dawn gloom, surrounded by a hopeful but shivering congregation muttering, well, theoretically, the sacred life-affirming sunbeam should be dramatically and with great spiritual significance illuminating the inner chamber right about now. Or perhaps it was yesterday. Or maybe it's scheduled for next Tuesday if this particularly enthusiastic Atlantic drizzle ever actually decides to take a brief holiday. The gods as always move in mysterious and occasionally rather damp ways. As you approach Newgrange today, Ageria, or at least its magnificent modern reconstruction, as the mound had collapsed and become overgrown for centuries before its rediscovery and excavation, you are confronted by a truly impressive sight. It's a vast circular earthen mound or cairn, roughly 80 meters, about 260 feet in diameter, and rising to a height of about 13 meters 43 feet. Its retaining wall is faced with brilliant white quartz stones brought from many miles away in the Wicklow Mountains, interspersed with darker, rounded granite cobbles from the Mourne Mountains, or the beaches of Dundalk Bay, creating a striking, almost glittering facade. Surrounding the base of this great mound is a ring of massive unshaped curbstones, many of which are intricately decorated with some of the most famous examples of European megalithic art. Spirals, chevrons, lozenges, and concentric circles pecked and incised into their surfaces. But the true marvel of Newgrange, the secret it guarded for so many centuries, lies within. The most famous of all its decorated curbstones, Curbstone 1, guards the entrance. This enormous stone is covered in a breathtaking profusion of intricate carvings, dominated by a magnificent triple spiral, a motif that has become almost an iconic symbol of Neolithic art and Irish heritage, even though Newgrange itself predates the arrival of the Celts in Ireland by many, many millennia. This entrance stone, Egeria, once blocked the passage, but now as you step past it in your imagination, of course, as access to the interior is carefully managed today, you find yourself at the mouth of a long, narrow passageway, about 19 meters 62 feet, in length, lined with large, upright orthostat stones, some of which are also decorated with carvings. This passage leads inexorably inwards, slightly uphill towards the very heart of the Great Mound. As you move down this cool stone-lined corridor, the light from the entrance fades, and a profound sense of entering a sacred ancient space envelops you. The passage eventually opens into a central chamber, roughly cruciform cross-shaped in layout with 3 smaller side recesses or cells. The roof of this central chamber is a masterpiece of Neolithic engineering, a corbelled vault built by skillfully overlapping massive stone slabs rising to a height of about 6 meters 20 feet, and it has remained watertight for over 5,000 years. Within the recesses of the chamber are large, shallow stone basins, which likely once held offerings or perhaps the cremated remains of important individuals, as Newgrange was undoubtedly a tomb, a house for the revered ancestors. Newgrange Egeria isn't just a picturesque pile of very old stones and a nice bit of prehistoric landscaping. It's a truly sophisticated Neolithic architectural masterpiece, absolutely brimming with more intricate, deeply symbolic, and possibly rather psychedelic-looking spiral carvings than a particularly enthusiastic 1960s hippie's most vivid dream journal. The ancestors who designed and built this place clearly had an incredibly strong sense of interior and exterior design and a profound connection to the cosmos. And this brings us to Newgrange's most famous, most magical, and most peculiar feature: its precise astronomical alignment with the winter solstice sunrise, which transforms it for a few precious moments each year into a lightbox of ancient solar reverence. Above the main entrance to the passage, there is a specially constructed opening, a small rectangular aperture known as the roof box. For most of the year, this roof box is sealed, and the interior of the passage and chamber remains in profound darkness. But for a few days around the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, typically around December 21st or 22nd, a remarkable event occurs. As the sun begins to rise on these specific mornings, its very first rays low on the southeastern horizon shine directly through this roof box, penetrating the narrow opening, traveling down the entire length of the 19-meter passage, and finally dramatically illuminating the floor and the rear wall of the central cruciform chamber with a beam of golden light. This breathtaking illumination lasts for only about 17 minutes, a fleeting magical connection between the depths of the tomb and the life-giving power of the returning sun. That roof box at Newgrange Egeria, it's like the world's oldest, most exclusive, most precisely timed, and undoubtedly most spiritually significant skylight, specifically designed by Neolithic geniuses for a very brief, intensely dramatic, 17-minute annual light show starring the newborn winter sun. Tickets for this particular performance were and still are, via a lottery system for modern visitors, incredibly hard to come by, and almost certainly involved significantly more than just showing up with a comfy cushion and a thermos of hot herbal tea. The symbolism of this event is profound. At the darkest time of the year, when the sun is at its lowest ebb, its light penetrates the very heart of this ancestral tomb, a clear and powerful message of rebirth, renewal, the promise of returning light and life, and the victory of the sun over darkness. It would have been a moment of immense spiritual significance for the Neolithic community that built and used Newgrange, perhaps a time for ceremonies connected to the ancestors of the turning of the seasons. and to hopes for the fertility of the land and the people in the coming year. The precise astronomical knowledge and sophisticated mathematical calculations undoubtedly employed by the Neolithic builders of Newgrange to achieve such a perfect and remarkably enduring winter solstice alignment within the narrow confines of the passage tomb, and the exact nature of the specific rituals, chants, or beliefs that were enacted there during this annual celestial event remain subjects of considerable awe, ongoing intensive research, and highly sophisticated archaeoastronomical modeling and interpretation by scholars. The engineering skill required to construct such a massive mound passage and chamber, with such precise orientation using only stone tools and human labor, is truly astonishing. The megalithic art that adorns Newgrange, particularly those famous spirals, chevrons, lozenges, and concentric circles found on the curbstones, the passage stones, and within the chamber itself, is another source of endless fascination and interpretation. These abstract geometric designs are powerful, evocative, and almost certainly imbued with deep symbolic meaning, though their exact interpretations are often debated. They might relate to astronomical observations, cosmological beliefs and toptic phenomena, patterns seen by the human eye during altered states of consciousness, perhaps induced during ritual maps of the landscape or the heavens or symbols of life, death, and rebirth, all resonating with the tomb's primary function and its dramatic solar alignment. Newgrange, then, Egeria, stands as a silent stone testament to the profound spiritual depth, the sophisticated astronomical knowledge, and the incredible engineering capabilities of the Neolithic peoples of Ireland, a light box that, for a few precious moments each year, still connects us directly to their ancient reverence for the sun, the ancestors, and the enduring mysteries of the cosmos. The breathtaking, almost magical precision of Newgrange in Ireland. Egeria, with its ancient passage tomb, dramatically illuminated by the first fleeting rays of the winter solstice sunrise, has now left its indelible, light-filled imprint upon your sleepy historical consciousness. You've seen how those Neolithic peoples over 5,000 years ago possessed not only incredible engineering skills, but also a profound, intimate understanding of celestial rhythms, encoding that knowledge into their most sacred monuments. But Ireland is not the only windswept, legend-haunted island on the northwestern fringes of Europe, where these ancient stone builders left their extraordinary mark. Our journey now takes us further north across the often turbulent waters of the Pentland Firth, to the remarkable Orkney Islands, a remote archipelago off the northern tip of Scotland. Here, amidst a landscape of dramatic sea cliffs, fertile green fields, and ever-present sighing winds, you will discover another astonishing concentration of Neolithic wonders, including some of the most magnificent and enigmatic stone circles in all of Britain. The stones of Stennis and the Great Ring of Brodgar, ancient sentinels that seem to ring with the echoes of a forgotten age. Welcome to Neolithic Orkney, Egeria, famous for its dramatic, awe-inspiring stone circles, its incredibly well-preserved prehistoric villages, its mysterious chambered tombs, and of course its unique ability to experience all four seasons, often quite vigorously in approximately 27 minutes, usually accompanied by a wind that feels like it's personally and rather enthusiastically attempting to exfoliate your very soul right down to the bone. Do bring a sturdy, well-fastened hat, and perhaps some small pocket-sized stone anchors for your feet just in case. A mainstream historical fact, and one that underscores the global importance of this remote archipelago, is that the heart of Neolithic Orkney is a designated UNESCO World Heritage Site. This remarkable recognition encompasses a dense concentration of exceptionally well-preserved Neolithic monuments, including the two great stone circles. We are about to explore the magnificent chambered passage tomb of Maeshowe, which also has its own dramatic winter solstice alignment, though with the setting sun, a fascinating counterpoint to Newgrange's sunrise, and the astonishingly well-preserved prehistoric village of Skara Brae, all dating from roughly 3000 BCE to around 2000 BCE. Together, these sites testify to a remarkably sophisticated, artistically gifted, and socially complex prehistoric society that flourished here in the far north at what might seem like the very edge of the world for over 1,000 years. Let us first approach in our mind's eye the stones of Stennis. This ancient circle, or perhaps more accurately, a henge monument, with a stone circle at its center, is believed to be one of the earliest such sites in the British Isles, possibly dating back to before 3000 BCE. Though only 4 of its original, perhaps 12 massive upright stones remain standing today, they are incredibly impressive, some soaring to heights of nearly 19 feet, almost 6 meters. These are not chunky, sarsen-like blocks. They are tall, thin, almost blade-like slabs of local Orcadian flagstone, their stark, elegant silhouettes cutting dramatically against the often gray, windswept Orkney sky. The circle was once surrounded by a rock-cut ditch and an outer bank, and at its center, archaeologists have found evidence of a large square stone setting that may have been a central hearth or altar. Imagine the scene. Egeria 5,000 years ago, a sacred enclosure. The great stones perhaps newly erected, their surfaces clean and sharp. A fire blazing at the center, and the Neolithic people of Orkney gathered here for rituals and ceremonies whose precise nature is now lost to us, but which undoubtedly connected them to the land, the sky, their ancestors, and their gods. Nearby, and perhaps a few centuries later in construction though, still part of the same vast ceremonial landscape, lies the even more spectacular Ring of Brodgar. This is one of the largest and most perfect true stone circles in Britain. A magnificent ring, originally composed of perhaps as many as 60 massive standing stones, of which 27 still endure, set within an enormous circular henge ditch, impressively carved out of the solid bedrock. The circle itself is over 100 meters, about 340 feet in diameter, and it occupies a dramatic, narrow isthmus of land between 2 large freshwater lochs, Loch of Stennis and Loch of Harre. The visual impact of these tall, gray, lichen-encrusted stones standing in their silent, patient circle against the vast open sky and the shimmering waters of the lochs is profoundly moving, almost otherworldly. It feels like a place of immense ancient power, a true temple of the winds. Our outline speaks of Orkney's ringing stones Egeria, while some stones in other megalithic traditions, like some of the blue stones of Stonehenge, which are said to have originated in an area of Wales with ringing rocks or lithophones, are known to produce musical or resonant tones when struck. The ringing of Orkney's circles is perhaps more metaphorical, more atmospheric. It's the haunting sound of the ever-present wind, whistling and sighing through the gaps between these ancient monoliths, creating an eerie, almost musical lament that seems to carry the whispers of millennia. Or perhaps it refers to the way these circles ring or enclose a sacred space, defining a boundary between the mundane world and a realm of ritual and spiritual power. What was the purpose of these magnificent Orcadian stone circles? Like Stonehenge and Avebury, they were almost certainly ceremonial meeting places for a large, dispersed Neolithic community, perhaps drawing people from across the Orkney mainland and even the surrounding smaller islands for important seasonal festivals, religious rites, or significant social gatherings. Their careful construction and often impressive scale suggest they were the result of immense communal effort, focal points for shared identity and belief. Many also show evidence of astronomical alignments, suggesting they served as sophisticated observatories for tracking the movements of the sun-moon, and perhaps significant stars helping these early farming communities to mark the passage of the seasons, to determine auspicious times for planting and harvesting, and to integrate their lives with the great cycles of the cosmos. The precise nature of the social and political organization of Neolithic Orkney that enabled the planning, quarrying, transportation, and meticulous erection of such truly monumental stone circles and associated ceremonial complexes like May Chauvet and the Ness of Brodgar, and the exact relationship sequence of construction and specific differentiated functions of these closely interconnected major sites within the heart of Neolithic Orkney are subjects of ongoing, intensive archaeological research, exciting new discoveries, and lively, sometimes quite spirited scholarly discussion and reinterpretation. A particularly quirky and utterly fascinating tidbit that has revolutionized our understanding of this Orcadian Neolithic landscape in recent years is the ongoing excavation at the Ness of Brodgar. This remarkable site, located on that narrow spit of land, directly between the Ring of Brodgar and the Stones of Stennis, has revealed a massive, previously entirely unknown complex of large, well-built, non-domestic stone structures, dating to the same period as the stone circles. These were not ordinary houses. They were clearly monumental buildings, perhaps temples, assembly halls, or ceremonial feasting centers, some with walls over 4 meters thick paved walkways, and even evidence of colored stone decoration and incised art. Archaeologists were just doing some routine survey work between the two famous stone circles, Egeria probably expecting to find a few lost Neolithic picnic baskets, or perhaps a particularly stubborn patch of prehistoric thistles, and instead they quite literally stumbled upon what appears to be the central beating ritual heart of the entire Orcadian Neolithic world, a vast, sophisticated temple complex that had been completely hidden beneath the turf for nearly 5,000 years. It's like looking for your car keys in your back garden and accidentally discovering the lost city of Atlantis, or perhaps a previously unknown wing of Neolithic Disneyland, complete with a VIP feasting hall and some very nicely decorated sacred outbuildings. The Ness of Brodgar, with its evidence of large-scale communal activity, feasting vast quantities of cattle bones have been found, and sophisticated architecture strongly suggests that the great stone circles of Brodgar and Stennis were not isolated monuments, but integral parts of a much larger, highly organized, and incredibly vibrant ceremonial and social landscape. It was a place where people came together perhaps from all over Orkney and even further afield, to participate in rituals to reaffirm social bonds and to connect with the sacred powers that governed their world. What exactly did they do in these giant stone circles Egeria under the vast, ever-changing Orkney sky? Sacred ceremonies, certainly. Profound astronomical observations, very likely. Perhaps also one likes to imagine a really big, very windy, and occasionally rather damp intertribal game of Neolithic hide-and-seek. "Ready or not, here I come," a young Orcadian might have shouted before enthusiastically circumnavigating a particularly imposing 30-foot standing stone in pursuit of their giggling playmates. Just let me quickly finish my ritual offering to the great Skua spirit of the northern winds first. These ringing stones of Orkney Egeria, standing in their ancient windswept circles, continue to hold their deepest secrets close. But they speak to us nonetheless of a remarkable prehistoric people who, on these remote northern isles, created a sacred landscape of enduring power and profound mystery. The windswept, heather-clad Orkney Islands Egeria, with their magnificent, almost starkly beautiful stone circles of Brodgar and Stennis, and the recently revealed wonders of the Ness of Brodgar ceremonial complex, have now given you a profound sense of the sophisticated Neolithic society that flourished in those remote northern climes, a people capable of creating a truly monumental, sacred landscape. You've imagined their rituals, their connection to the land and sky, all expressed through these enduring, ringing stones. But the megalith building phenomenon, that extraordinary prehistoric impulse to quarry transport and erect massive stones for purposes beyond mere shelter, was not confined to northwestern Europe. Our sleepy historical journey now takes a sharp turn southwards, leaving the mists and moors behind as we glide into the sun-drenched azure embrace of the Mediterranean Sea. Here on ancient islands like Malta and Sardinia, equally enigmatic and often uniquely distinct megalithic traditions arose, whispering their own peculiar island mysteries across the millennia. A mainstream historical fact, and one that consistently astounds those unfamiliar with Mediterranean prehistory, is that the tiny islands of Malta and its smaller neighbor Gozo are home to some of the world's oldest freestanding stone structures, the megalithic temples of Malta. These remarkable temple complexes, dating primarily from around 3600 BCE to 2500 BCE, predate not only Stonehenge's Sarsen phase and the Great Pyramids of Giza in Egypt, but also many of the other major megalithic traditions of mainland Europe. This makes Malta a crucial, if sometimes overlooked, cradle of monumental architecture. The ancient Maltese, it seems, weren't just casually building a few simple stone shrines. They were constructing entire sophisticated, multi-roomed, luxury prehistoric temple condos for their deities, complete with elegantly curved apsidal chambers, carefully paved floors, oracle holes for divine communication, and probably some very nice, if now long-vanished, sea views before all the modern tourists and their rather less sacred apartment blocks arrived, that is. And they did all this thousands of years before many other European cultures even got around to thinking about stacking really big rocks on top of each other in an organized fashion. Take that mainland Europe. Malta was way ahead of the megalithic curve. Imagine yourself, Ageria, stepping into one of these Maltese temples. Perhaps the magnificent Hygarkium or Menasdra, perched dramatically on the southern cliffs overlooking the sparkling Mediterranean, or the vast Gantaja Giants Tower complex on Gozo, whose name itself speaks to the awe its massive stones inspired in later inhabitants. These are not crude, haphazard piles of rock. They are complex, carefully planned structures, typically featuring a series of D-shaped or kidney-shaped apses or chambers, usually 5 or 7 opening off a central corridor, all constructed from enormous blocks of local Globigerina limestone. The builders employed sophisticated techniques including corbelled roofing to create vaulted ceilings within the chambers, and sometimes even dressed or smoothed the interior stone surfaces. The facades often featured imposing concave entrances and monumental stone thresholds. The interiors of these temples were clearly places of intense ritual activity. Archaeologists have found stone altars carved, stone tables, niches for offerings, and those intriguing oracle holes. Small, carefully cut apertures connecting different chambers through which a priest or priestess might have delivered divine pronouncements or received petitions from worshippers. Many of the stones are adorned with simple but evocative carvings. Spirals, a common megalithic motif we've seen elsewhere, perhaps symbolizing life, death, and rebirth, dotted patterns, and even representations of animals or fish. But most famously, these Maltese temples have yielded numerous statuettes and larger sculptures of very corpulent, usually female figures, the so-called fat ladies of Malta. These remarkable figurines, often depicted seated or reclining, with exaggerated hips, thighs, and breasts, are widely interpreted as representing a powerful mother goddess, an earth mother deity, or perhaps priestesses engaged in fertility cults. A particularly famous and undeniably quirky, if you're into prehistoric statuary, tidbit is the Sleeping Lady of Malta, a small, beautifully crafted terracotta figurine discovered in the subterranean hypogeum of Hal Saflieni. She depicts a very plump female figure reclining serenely on her side, seemingly in a deep, eternal sleep, her expression enigmatic and peaceful. Is she a representation of a sleeping goddess? A priestess in a ritual trance? A symbol of death and the promise of rebirth? Or perhaps just a very, very relaxed Neolithic lady enjoying a divinely sanctioned afternoon nap after a particularly large and satisfying ritual feast? Her mysterious smile continues to captivate imaginations. And speaking of the hypogeum of Halsafleni Agiria, this is another utterly unique Maltese megalithic marvel. It's an extraordinary underground necropolis and sanctuary, meticulously carved out of solid limestone over many centuries, consisting of a complex network of interconnected chambers, passages, and halls, on 3 distinct levels reaching a depth of nearly 11 meters 36 feet below the surface. It seems to have served as both a burial place, the remains of thousands of individuals were found within, and a sacred ritual site, perhaps for an ancestor cult or chthonic deities. Some of its chambers are designed to mimic the architecture of the above-ground temples, complete with carved, corbelled ceilings and decorative red ochre paintings. The acoustics within certain parts of the hypogeum are also said to be quite remarkable, with specific resonant frequencies that might have been used in chanting or ritual sound-making. The precise origins and exact cultural connections of the prehistoric Maltese temple builders, and the specific nature of their undoubtedly complex religious beliefs, their social organization that enabled such monumental and sustained construction efforts, and what ultimately led to the relatively abrupt end of their temple-building culture around 2500 BCE, remain subjects of intense, ongoing archaeological investigation, sophisticated scientific analysis, and considerable, often quite spirited scholarly debate, with theories for their origins ranging from entirely indigenous development by a long isolated island population to various hypotheses involving cultural influences or even migrations from Sicily, the Aegean, or possibly even Anatolia, though direct evidence for such external links is often elusive. Now, let us sail our sleepy historical ship a little further west in the Mediterranean Egeria, to the large, rugged, and equally enigmatic island of Sardinia. Here, another remarkable and entirely unique megalithic tradition flourished primarily during the Bronze Age and into the early Iron Age, roughly from the 18th century BCE down to its conquest by Rome in 238 BCE, the Nuragic civilization. This culture is named after its most distinctive and ubiquitous architectural feature, the nuraghi, plural nuraghi. Sardinia Egeria has literally thousands of these nuraghi. Estimates range from 7,000 to over 10,000 dolmens, dotting its landscape from coastal promontories to inland mountain valleys. It's like every self-respecting Bronze Age Sardinian chieftain, or perhaps every extended clan group, decided they absolutely needed their own personal, very rustic, impressively sturdy, and often rather picturesquely pointy stone castle tower. My nurag, one can almost hear them boasting to their neighbors, is considerably larger, has slightly more intricately corbelled internal chambers, and a demonstrably better strategic view of the surrounding sheep grazing territory than your rather pathetically undersized and architecturally uninspired nurag down in the next valley. So there are DDs. What is a nurag? It's typically a tower fortress, or a heavily fortified dwelling constructed from massive, often roughly dressed blocks of local stone, usually basalt, granite, or limestone, using a sophisticated dry stone masonry technique, no mortar. The classic form is a truncated conical tower, sometimes reaching heights of 20 meters over 60 feet or more, with impressively thick battered walls. Internally, they often feature one or more circular corbelled vaulted chambers on different levels, connected by narrow stone staircases built within the thickness of the walls. Some nuraghi are simple single towers, while others are incredibly complex, consisting of a central keep surrounded by multiple subsidiary towers, curtain walls, and enclosed courtyards forming veritable prehistoric fortresses. The precise purpose of these thousands of nuraghi is another great Mediterranean megalithic mystery, and much debated by archaeologists. Were they primarily defensive strongholds built by rival chieftains or communities to protect their territories and resources in a perhaps rather fractious Bronze Age Sardinian society? Or were they more prestigious residences for elite families, symbols of their status and power? Could they have served as territorial markers, visibly delineating the boundaries of different clan lands? Or did they also have significant ceremonial or religious functions, perhaps as sacred centers for their communities? Most likely Egeria, they served a combination of these functions, their roles perhaps evolving over the many centuries of their construction and use. Alongside the nuraghi, the Nuragic civilization also created other impressive megalithic structures, including giants' tombs, tombe dei giganti, long communal gallery graves, often with a distinctive, gracefully curved facade of upright stone slabs, sometimes featuring a central taller stele with a small entrance at its base, and sophisticated sacred well or spring sanctuaries like the beautifully preserved Su Tempiesu at Orun, with its intricate stone architecture and evidence of water cults. These island mysteries of Malta and Sardinia Egeria, with their unique temple complexes and their ubiquitous nuragic towers, remind us that the megalithic phenomenon in Europe was not a monolithic entity but a rich tapestry of diverse regional traditions, each responding to local environments, available materials, and unique cultural and spiritual trajectories. There must be something about island living Egeria that particularly inspires people to build really impressive, slightly mysterious, and incredibly enduring stone structures. Maybe it's all the fresh sea air and the abundance of readily available, if rather heavy, building materials. Or perhaps it's just a deep-seated, entirely understandable desire to make absolutely sure that your very important, sacred buildings or your impressively fortified chiefly residences don't accidentally float away or get washed out to sea during a particularly enthusiastic high tide or an unexpected tsunami. Very practical, those ancient islanders. You have now Egeria journeyed in your sleepy imagination from the windswept grandeur of Neolithic Orkney, with its magnificent stone circles of Brodgar and Stennis, and the astonishing revelations of the Ness of Brodgar complex, to the sun-drenched Mediterranean islands of Malta and Sardinia, marveling at their unique and incredibly ancient megalithic traditions. The sophisticated, multi-apsidal temples of the Maltese archipelago, and the thousands of enigmatic nuragic towers that dominate the Sardinian landscape. You've seen how these diverse prehistoric cultures, separated by vast distances and distinct environments, all shared that remarkable, almost obsessive human impulse to build with great stones, to create enduring monuments that continue to whisper their secrets across the millennia. We've explored their forms, pondered their construction, but the biggest, most tantalizing question of all remains why? What was the true purpose? The driving motivation, the deep societal or spiritual need that compelled these ancient peoples to invest such an extraordinary amount of their time, their resources, and their sheer physical labor into quarrying, transporting, and erecting these colossal stone structures? Was it all for tombs, for temples, for intricate star maps, or perhaps for something else entirely? Something we can now only dimly perceive through the mists of deep prehistory. The challenge, of course, Egeria, in definitively answering this why question for most megalithic sites, is the profound silence of their builders. These were largely pre-literate societies, at least in terms of leaving behind written texts that explicitly explain their beliefs, their rituals, or the precise functions of their stone monuments. We have no handy Neolithic instruction manuals titled How to Build Your Own Astronomically Aligned Stone Circle and Appease the Great Earth Mother in 10 Easy, if extremely labor-intensive steps. We have no Bronze Age TripAdvisor reviews saying, visited the local dolmen, excellent acoustics for ancestral chanting 5 stars. Slightly drafty in winter though, would recommend bringing an extra mammoth hide. So, modern archaeologists, prehistorians, and archaeoastronomers must act as historical detectives, meticulously piecing together clues from the stones themselves, from their layout and orientation, from any associated artifacts found within or around them from the surrounding landscape, and sometimes very cautiously from comparative anthropology and the study of later historically documented belief systems that might preserve some echoes of these ancient traditions. So why did these Neolithic and Bronze Age people spend literally centuries in some cases dragging unimaginably giant rocks all over the European countryside? Was it purely for complex astronomical calculations to ensure their barley crops didn't accidentally get planted during a meteor shower? Was it all about creating really impressive, super durable, sacred final resting places for their most important ancestors? Or maybe it was because young Og dramatically bet young Grok that he couldn't possibly stand that particularly enormous pointy-looking stone upright in the middle of the sacred meadow, and things just rather enthusiastically escalated from there on a pan-European scale. The stones themselves, alas, remain, beautifully if somewhat frustratingly silent on the precise details of their original motivational speeches. Despite this inherent mystery, several major, often interconnected purposes for these megalithic monuments have been proposed by scholars, and the evidence for many of them is quite compelling. One of the most widely recognized functions, particularly for structures like dolmens chamber tombs and passage graves such as the magnificent Newgrange in Ireland that we explored, was funerary and ancestral. A mainstream historical fact is that a vast number of European megalithic structures are demonstrably tombs containing the skeletal remains, often disarticulated or cremated, of numerous individuals, sometimes interred over many generations. These were not just simple graves, they were monumental houses for the dead, powerful focal points for ancestor veneration. In early farming societies where connection to the land and lineage was becoming increasingly important, honoring the ancestors who had first cleared and cultivated that land, and whose spirits were perhaps believed to still influence its fertility and the well-being of their descendants, would have been a crucial social and religious obligation. These great stone tombs served as tangible links between the living community and its ancestral past places, for performing rituals to ensure the peaceful rest of the dead and to solicit their continued benevolent influence. Another major proposed function, particularly for stone circles like Stonehenge Avebury or the Ring of Brodgar, and also for some alignments, was that of temples or ceremonial centers. These were clearly sacred enclosures, set apart from the everyday world where communities would gather for important religious festivals, seasonal rites of passage, perhaps initiations, marriages, or celebrations of birth and death, and other communal rituals designed to maintain harmony with the divine, ensure the fertility of the land and its people, and reaffirm social cohesion. The very act of constructing these monuments, often requiring the coordinated labor of many people over long periods, would itself have been a powerful community-building exercise. Your average major megalithic site area probably wasn't just a simple single-function one-trick pony. Oh no, it was likely a sophisticated multi-purpose prehistoric community hub. It was a tomb. It was a temple. It was a surprisingly accurate solar and lunar calendar. It was probably also a rather decent place to have a slightly windy but spiritually uplifting communal picnic, and perhaps contemplate the deeper meanings of existence after a particularly good or bad harvest. Very versatile, those Neolithic architects and ritual specialists. The connection to astronomical observation and calendrical functions is another compelling theory for many megalithic sites, most famously Stonehenge with its precise solstice alignments, and Newgrange with its dramatic winter solstice lightbox effect. Many other stone circles and alignments across Europe also show clear orientations towards significant rising or setting positions of the sun-moon, or even specific bright stars at crucial times of the year. For early agricultural communities whose lives were so intimately tied to the seasonal cycle, being able to accurately predict these turning points, the longest and shortest days, the equinoxes, the optimal times for planting and harvesting, would have been of immense practical and religious importance. These stone star maps, or celestial calendars, would have allowed them to structure their year, to time their agricultural activities and to perform the necessary rituals at the correct auspicious moments to ensure the continued benevolence of the cosmic powers that governed fertility and abundance. Imagine the scene at Stonehenge on the morning of the winter solstice Ageria. The entire community is gathered hushed and expectant in the pre-dawn chill, and as the first faint rays of the returning sun precisely align with a specific gap in the massive sarsens, dramatically illuminating a central point. It's not just a pretty light show, it's a profound divine signal the darkness has been overcome. The sun is reborn, the days will now begin to lengthen, and life will, with the gods' favor, continue. Right then, team. The chief Neolithic astronomer priest might announce with satisfaction after witnessing this celestial event, "If we've positioned this rather hefty 30-ton lintel just so, then on this the very shortest day of the year at precisely 9:07 a.m., give or take a few minutes for atmospheric refraction, and the occasional unexpected cloud bank, a single, sacred shaft of sunlight should now be dramatically and with great spiritual import illuminating Great Aunt Edna's central burial chamber." Always assuming, of course, that it isn't completely overcast again this year, and also assuming that Great Aunt Edna actually liked being woken up so early by what is essentially a divinely ordained, astronomically precise alarm clock. It's all about those sacred sun-kissed details you see. Megalithic monuments may also have served as powerful territorial markers or symbols of group identity and power. In the newly settled landscapes of Neolithic Europe, as populations grew and communities began to claim and defend specific farming territories, the construction of these large, highly visible, and incredibly labor-intensive stone structures could have been a way for a particular kin group clan or emerging chiefly elite to assert their presence, their ancestral rights to that land, and their social cohesion and strength to any neighboring groups. Building a truly impressive passage tomb or a massive stone circle was a clear statement. We are here. Our ancestors are here. This land is ours, and we possess the communal power, the spiritual authority, and the engineering know-how to create such enduring monuments. The relative importance of these different potential functions, funerary, ceremonial, astronomical, or socio-political, for any specific megalithic site, or even for different types of megalithic structures across various regions of Europe, and how these functions might have shifted or evolved over the many centuries, sometimes even millennia, of their use and modification remains a subject of vigorous ongoing debate and intensive research among archaeologists, often involving new scientific data from excavations and surveys, sophisticated archaeoastronomical analyses, and the careful reinterpretation of older evidence in light of new theoretical perspectives. A quirky or fringe tidbit that often surfaces in more popular, less academically rigorous discussions about megaliths involves theories of ley lines, supposed alignments of ancient sites along invisible Earth energy pathways, ancient astronauts or lost supercivilizations like Atlantis being responsible for their construction. While these ideas capture the romantic imagination and speak to the enduring mystery of these stones, they are not supported by mainstream archaeological evidence, which clearly points to indigenous Neolithic and Bronze Age European peoples as the builders using ingenuity, immense labor, and a profound understanding of their local environment and available resources. It's highly probable Egeria that most major megalithic sites were not built for a single exclusive purpose, but rather served multiple overlapping and perhaps evolving functions within their communities. A Great Passage tomb like Newgrange was clearly a burial place for revered ancestors, but its dramatic solstice alignment also made it a powerful astronomical observatory and a focal point for seasonal ceremonies. A stone circle like Avebury was undoubtedly a vast ceremonial enclosure, but it may also have incorporated calendrical alignments and served as a crucial gathering place for a wide region, reinforcing social and political ties. These were not just stones, they were the very heart of their builders' world, imbued with their deepest beliefs about life, death, the cosmos, and their own place within it. You have now, Egeria, wandered in your sleepy imagination through the vast, often windswept landscapes of prehistoric Europe, contemplating the immense labor, the sophisticated engineering, and the profound communal dedication that went into creating those magnificent, megalithic monuments. You've stood before the iconic grandeur of Stonehenge, felt the sprawling embrace of Avebury's earthen banks and stone circles, marveled at the seemingly endless stone armies of Karnak, and witnessed the magical play of winter solstice light within the sacred passage tomb of Newgrange. You understand that these were not just random piles of very large rocks. They were complex structures likely serving multiple overlapping purposes as tombs for revered ancestors, temples for communal ceremony, and sophisticated observatories for tracking the celestial dance of sun, moon, and stars. But the story etched into these ancient stones, Egeria, is not just told by their sheer scale or their astronomical alignments. Many of these megalithic surfaces themselves bear witness to another layer of meaning, another form of ancient communication, the enigmatic, often abstract, and deeply symbolic carvings known as megalithic art. It is to these carved secrets that we now turn our gentle, curious gaze, a mainstream historical fact, and one that adds immeasurably to the mystery and allure of these ancient sites, is that many European megalithic monuments, particularly the interior orthostats, upright stones and capstones of passage graves like Newgrange in Ireland or Gavrinis in Brittany, as well as some dolmens and even individual menhirs, are adorned with intricate abstract and geometric carvings. This megalithic art, created using the same basic stone tool techniques of pecking, incising, and grinding that were employed to shape the great stones themselves, represents one of the earliest and most widespread forms of monumental artistic expression in prehistoric Europe. These are not just idle doodles. They are deliberate, meaningful symbols, a kind of visual language whose full vocabulary and grammar are now largely lost to us, but which undoubtedly held profound significance for the Neolithic and Bronze Age communities who created and interacted with them. Unlike the often strikingly naturalistic depictions of animals found in the much older Paleolithic cave paintings of places like Lascaux or Altamira, much of European megalithic art, especially in the Atlantic regions, Ireland, Brittany, Iberia, tends towards the abstract, the geometric, the highly stylized. While you might occasionally find a recognizable, if very simplified representation of a human figure or an animal, the dominant motifs are often non-figurative. A captivating repertoire of spirals, concentric circles, U-shapes, cup marks, zigzags, chevrons, lozenges, and complex grid or lattice patterns. trying to definitively read what a 5,000-year-old highly abstract zigzag line positioned next to a beautifully carved lozenge and a series of 3 enigmatic pecked dots really meant to its Neolithic creator Igria is a bit like trying to understand the complete emotional subtext and socio-political commentary of a particularly obscure piece of modern art by only reading the gallery's rather terse fire safety instructions and the price tag. Yes. You might ponder, gazing at a complex arrangement of pecked lines on a weathered granite slab. This clearly represents either the fundamental interconnected energetic pathways of the entire cosmos, the sacred journey of the sun through the underworld. During the winter months, a highly detailed genealogical map of the local chieftain's lineage, including all his third cousins twice removed, or possibly just that the artist was having a particularly bumpy and artistically inspiring chariot ride, had chariots been invented yet, which they mostly hadn't. In the Neolithic on the way to the sacred rock that morning, and their hand slipped a bit with the hammerstone, the interpretive possibilities are as always delightfully endless. Let's explore some of these common and often quite beautiful motifs. Spirals are perhaps one of the most iconic and widespread symbols in megalithic art, found in glorious profusion on sites like the entrance stone of New Grange, but also appearing in Brittany, Iberia, and even on some Maltese temple carvings. These can be single spirals, double spirals, S-shapes, or even complex triple spirals, triscles. Their precise meaning is of course debated, but they are often thought to symbolize the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The journey of the sun or moon across the sky, the swirling movement of water, perhaps even the journey of the soul to the other world, or the disorienting transformative experiences of trance states or shamanistic journeys. Those Neolithic artists Igaria really loved their spirals. Single spirals, double spirals, triple spirals, spirals within spirals. It's as if they had collectively discovered the immense aesthetic and symbolic potential of the spirograph toy about 5,000 years before its official invention, and just couldn't get enough of it. More spirals Og, the chief megalithic designer, might have declared. The revered ancestors, and indeed the very fabric of the cosmos itself, clearly demand more aesthetically pleasing, profoundly meaningful, and possibly just a little bit dizzying concentric circular motifs on every available stone surface. Concentric circles and U-shapes, sometimes called arcs, are also very common. Concentric circles might, like spirals, relate to celestial bodies, sacred enclosures, or perhaps ripples in water. U-shapes are sometimes interpreted as representing boats, especially in coastal regions or areas with strong riverine connections, a crescent moon, or perhaps even a stylized representation of a female deity or horned animal. Then there are the enigmatic cup marks, or cupules. These are small, roughly circular cup-shaped hollows, usually a few centimeters across, deliberately pecked into rock surfaces. They are found not only on megalithic monuments across Europe, but also on natural rock outcrops worldwide, making them one of the oldest and most widespread forms of rock art known to humanity. Their purpose is incredibly mysterious and highly debated. Were they for making small offerings, perhaps libations of milk, honey, or water to spirits or ancestors? Did they represent stars in a kind of prehistoric celestial map? Were they used as a counting system, or perhaps in some long-forgotten game? Or did the very act of pecking these cups into the sacred stone hold some ritual significance, perhaps symbolically releasing the stone's spirit or power cup marks, Egeria, tiny, mysterious, endlessly debated pecked-out hollows on giant, otherwise quite stoic rocks? Were they intended for sacred thimble-sized offerings of Neolithic acorn wine to particularly diminutive earth spirits? A prehistoric, very minimalist game of celestial marbles played by extremely patient children with excellent hand-eye coordination. Or perhaps just the unfortunate result of a particularly enthusiastic and slightly off-target Neolithic woodpecker with an unusually strong beak and a profound misunderstanding of appropriate nesting sites. The stones, as is their charmingly frustrating habit, are playing it very cool and not giving away too many of their deepest secrets. Zigzag chevrons, V-shapes, and wavy lines are another common category of abstract motif. These are often interpreted as representing water rivers or rain, all vital for early farming communities. They might also symbolize lightning snakes, often powerful chthonic or fertility symbols, energy, or perhaps serve as decorative borders or boundary markers within a larger design. Lozenges, diamond shapes, rhomboids, and various grid or lattice patterns also appear frequently, their precise meanings even more elusive to us now, though they undoubtedly formed part of a coherent symbolic system understood by their creators. In some megalithic traditions, particularly in Brittany and Iberia, you also find intriguing depictions of axe heads. These are often quite stylized but clearly recognizable representations of the polished stone axe heads that were such important tools for clearing forests, for agriculture, for woodworking, and perhaps also potent symbols of status and power in Neolithic society. Their presence carved onto sacred stones might signify the power of a chieftain, a dedication to a deity associated with craftsmanship, or forest clearing, a symbol of ritual sacrifice, as axes were sometimes used in sacrifices, or perhaps even an emblem of the taming of nature and the rise of agriculture. The precise symbolic meanings and intended cultural functions of this diverse repertoire of abstract and geometric motifs found in European megalithic art, particularly the almost ubiquitous spirals, the enigmatic cup and ring marks, and the many complex region-specific geometric designs remain subjects of intense scholarly debate and widely varying, often quite imaginative interpretations, with researchers frequently relying on cautious cross-cultural ethnographic analogies with more recent traditional art forms. Detailed neuropsychological theories about entoptic phenomena, visual patterns generated by the human nervous system itself during altered states of consciousness, such as those induced by trance ritual or the consumption of hallucinogenic substances, which some scholars believe might be reflected in these ancient geometric patterns, or highly contextual archaeological analysis of the placement and association of these motifs within specific sites as direct, unambiguous translations from the prehistoric artists themselves are of course impossible. A quirky or fringe tidbit linking back to that idea of entoptic phenomena is that some researchers have indeed suggested that many of the repetitive geometric patterns found in megalithic art, the zigzags, the lattices, the spirals, the nested U-shapes, might be visual representations of the patterns seen behind the eyelids during shamanistic trances or other altered states of consciousness induced by ritual practices like prolonged dancing, chanting, fasting, or perhaps even the use of psychoactive plants, though direct evidence for the latter in megalithic Europe is often scarce and highly debated. This theory posits that the art is not just symbolic, but also a record of profound visionary experiences, a mapping of inner spiritual landscapes. The placement of this art is also often highly significant. It's frequently found on the entrance stones to passage graves like at Newgrange within the hidden darkness of their burial chambers, or on specific, perhaps ritually important stones within a circle or alignment, suggesting it was not meant for casual, everyday viewing by everyone, but was part of a sacred, often restricted ceremonial context. These carved secrets, Egeria, were a visual language, a symbolic system for communicating complex ideas, cosmological beliefs, ancestral narratives, and sacred laws, all without the need for written words, their meanings whispered directly from the enduring stone to those who possess the cultural key to their understanding. You are now, Egeria, deeply immersed in the world of European megalithic art. Those enigmatic spirals, those cryptic cup marks, those stylized axe heads and geometric patterns pecked and incised onto the ancient weathered surfaces of colossal stones. You've pondered their possible meanings as symbols of cosmic cycles, as maps of sacred journeys, as records of visionary experiences, or as potent emblems of power and identity. But for all our modern archaeological and scientific efforts to decode these carved secrets, a profound sense of mystery often remains. The original builders of these monuments, those Neolithic and Bronze Age peoples, vanished into the mists of prehistory long before the advent of written records in most of these regions, taking the precise keys to their symbolic language with them. And so, as centuries and then millennia passed, later generations encountering these awe-inspiring, often seemingly inexplicable stone structures wove their own rich tapestry of folklore myth and gentle legends around them, attempting to make sense of these silent, enigmatic sentinels from a forgotten age. A mainstream historical fact, and one that adds another layer of charm and cultural significance to these ancient sites, is that in many parts of Europe where megalithic monuments are found, from the windswept coasts of Ireland and Brittany to the rolling downlands of England and the moors of Scandinavia, incredibly rich and diverse traditions of folklore and local legend developed over the centuries to explain their origins, their purposes, and their perceived magical properties. Long after the specific beliefs and rituals of the original Neolithic or Bronze Age builders had faded from collective memory, these stones continue to exert a powerful hold on the human imagination, becoming intertwined with tales of giants, fairies, saints, petrified people, and hidden treasures. These stories, while not historically accurate in a scientific sense, often serve to preserve a sense of the stone's sacredness, their otherness, and their deep connection to the ancestral landscape. One of the most common and widespread themes in megalithic folklore Egeria is the attribution of their construction to giants. This makes perfect intuitive sense, doesn't it? When faced with a massive dolmen capstone weighing many tons or a towering menhir thrusting towards the sky and lacking any knowledge of the sophisticated communal engineering techniques, we discussed earlier what other explanation could there be than that these were the work of a race of immensely strong, larger-than-life beings from a mythical past. And so you find sites known as giants' graves, giants' tables, table des géants in French, giants' quoits being a throwing game. Imagining giants playing with these massive stones, or Giants' Dance, an early name for Stonehenge. These tales often depict the giants as somewhat clumsy or simple-minded, perhaps dropping stones by accident or engaging in monumental games, but they acknowledge the sheer superhuman effort evidently required to move such colossal weights. So how did those incredibly heavy 50-ton capstones get perfectly balanced on top of those rather precarious-looking uprights to form a dolmen Egeria? Well, obviously it was giants. Really big, remarkably strong, and apparently quite artistically inclined, if occasionally somewhat architecturally haphazard giants who clearly enjoyed building very sturdy stone furniture for their afterlife picnics. Or perhaps just for a really impressive game of prehistoric Jenga. It makes so much more intuitive sense for many than all that complicated, slightly boring stuff about levers, earthen ramps, log rollers, and highly organized communal effort, doesn't it? Another very prevalent category of megalithic folklore involves petrification legends. Stories of people or sometimes animals being magically turned to stone, often as a divine punishment for some transgression. These tales provide a wonderfully imaginative explanation for the often human-like shapes of standing stones, or for the arrangement of stones in circles or rows. In Cornwall, England, you have the famous Merry Maidens stone circle, said to be a group of young women turned to stone for daring to dance on a Sunday. Nearby are two taller stones called the Pipers, supposedly the musicians who were playing for their illicit revelry, also similarly petrified. Similarly, the Hurlers, another Cornish stone circle complex, are said to be men transformed into stone for playing the ancient game of hurling on the Sabbath. In Brittany, as we touched upon, the vast alignments of Karnak are sometimes explained in local folklore as a Roman legion, or a pagan army that was magically turned to stone by St. Cornelius, who rather conveniently is the patron saint of cattle, and the stones do look a bit like herds from a distance, or sometimes by the great wizard Merlin. Beware the stone circle on a particularly spooky Midsummer's Eve Egeria. That's precisely when the Merry Maidens, who are of course those permanently petrified, formerly rather naughty dancing girls, supposedly come magically alive for one night only, and have a jolly good, if somewhat stony and creaky spectral dance under the moonlight. If you happen to wander by and they invite you to join in, it's probably best to politely decline, unless you fancy becoming a permanent, if rather artistically arranged, new addition to their prehistoric rock band. It's a cautionary tale with a very catchy, if distinctly lithic beat. Fairy lore is also deeply intertwined with many megalithic sites, particularly the smaller, more secluded dolmens, often called druids' altars, or fairy tables, in later folklore. Though the druid connection is another layer of myth we'll unravel soon. ancient burial mounds and stone circles that came to be known as fairy rings. These were often seen as the dwelling places of fairies, elves, pixies, or other mysterious beings from the otherworld portals between the human realm and theirs. It was considered very unlucky, even dangerous, to disturb these fairy stones, to damage them, or to build too close to them. Ill fortune, sickness, or even enchantment might befall anyone who disrespected these ancient, spirit-haunted places. Children might be warned away from them, especially at twilight. Sometimes offerings of milk or food were left at these stones to appease the fairy folk. That charming little moss-covered dolmen, tucked away in the quiet depths of the woods of Egeria. Don't even think about disturbing it, or using its convenient flat capstone as a makeshift picnic table without first asking permission from the local unseen residents. It's almost certainly prime, highly desirable real estate for a rather numerous and possibly quite territorially defensive family of easily offended and magically potent fairies. You really wouldn't want to accidentally knock over their tiny, invisible teapot, spill your decidedly unmagical lemonade on their sacred mushroom ring, or incur a lifelong inconvenient curse involving an inexplicable craving for dew-soaked moss and an inability to ever find a matching pair of socks again. The extent to which certain recurring motifs and themes in European megalithic folklore, such as the widespread tales of petrification for Sabbath-breaking stones with specific healing powers, or the association of ancient mounds and circles with fairies or otherworldly beings might contain genuine, albeit heavily distorted, fragmented, or entirely reinterpreted echoes of the original prehistoric beliefs, rituals, and cosmological understandings associated with these sites by their Neolithic or Bronze Age builders, versus being entirely later independent folk creations generated by subsequent cultures attempting to explain these mysterious, ancient landmarks within their own often Christianized or romanticized belief systems, is a fascinating and often entirely unprovable area of ongoing folkloristic, anthropological, and archaeological speculation. As Christianity spread across Europe, many of these ancient pagan sites were either deliberately destroyed, ignored, or quite frequently Christianized. Legends arose of saints like St. Patrick in Ireland or St. Cornelius in Brittany, overcoming pagan magic associated with the stones, or miraculously moving them, or even consecrating them by carving crosses onto their surfaces, or building churches nearby. This was a way of incorporating these powerful pre-existing sacred places into the new religious landscape, taming their pagan associations, and redirecting their perceived spiritual energy. Many megalithic sites also acquired reputations for possessing magical properties. Certain stones were believed to have healing powers. People might rub against them or pass sick children through holed stones like the Menin Toll in Cornwall hoping for a cure. Others were seen as fertility stones where women wishing to conceive might perform specific rituals. Some were wishing stones or stones that, if touched or circled in a particular way, could grant good luck or reveal the future. And as mentioned, there are widespread tales of stones that are said to dance or move on certain nights of the year, particularly Midsummer's Eve, Halloween, Samhain, or New Year's Eve, often when the church bells are ringing, a delightful fusion of pagan magic and Christian temporal markers. And finally, the almost universal belief that hidden treasure, gold jewels, magical artifacts, was buried beneath these ancient stones or within their chambers has been both a source of romantic fascination and tragically a major cause of their destruction. Over the centuries, as hopeful but misguided treasure hunters have dug into toppled or even blown up these irreplaceable monuments in their quest for riches. These gentle legends, Egeria, these folk tales of giants and fairies, of dancing stones and petrified sinners, while not providing us with factual historical information about the megalithic builders themselves, are nonetheless a precious part of their enduring legacy. They tell us how later cultures tried to make sense of these awe-inspiring, enigmatic structures, how they wove them into their own imaginative and spiritual landscapes, and how they kept a sense of their ancient mystery and sacred power alive, even when their original purpose had long since faded into the deepest mists of time. The ancient stones of Europe Egeria have now begun to share some of their more whimsical, if not entirely historically accurate secrets with you. you've wandered through a landscape populated by the gentle legends that later cultures wove around these enigmatic megalithic monuments. Tales of giants heaving colossal capstones into place for their otherworldly picnics, of mischievous fairies holding moonlit revels within ancient stone circles, of unfortunate Sabbath breakers petrified into eternal stone dancers, and of sacred wells and hold stones imbued with magical healing or wish-granting properties. These folk tales, while not explaining the original Neolithic or Bronze Age purpose of the megaliths, certainly kept a sense of their mystery and ancient power alive in the popular imagination for centuries. But there is one particular association, one enduring romantic myth that has become almost inextricably linked with these great stone circles, especially with the iconic grandeur of Stonehenge, a myth that involves mysterious white-robed sickle-wielding priests, sacred oak groves, and arcane Celtic wisdom, the Druids. It's time, Egeria, to gently unravel this popular, persistent, yet largely mistaken notion of a druid's stone dance at these ancient sites. The popular image is a potent one, isn't it? You can almost picture it, a misty dawn on Salisbury Plain. The great sarsens of Stonehenge silhouetted against a rising sun, and a procession of venerable, long-bearded druid priests, clad in flowing white robes, their arms adorned with golden torques, perhaps one of them holding a golden sickle aloft, all engaged in some profound, mystical solstice ceremony within the ancient stone circle. This vision, Egeria, is deeply embedded in much of our modern cultural consciousness, fueled by romantic paintings, poetry novels, and even some rather enthusiastic, if historically anachronistic, modern spiritual practices. But like so many compelling historical images, it's an idea that, while wonderfully atmospheric, doesn't quite align with the rather more prosaic and significantly more ancient timeline established by archaeology. So the very popular, very romantic idea of ancient druids building Stonehenge, or indeed most of the other major megalithic sites we've discussed, it's a bit like saying that, for example, the ancient Romans invented the internet, or that William Shakespeare personally designed the first smartphone. The timing, you see, is just a little bit off by, a mere couple of millennia or so. A minor historical detail for some particularly enthusiastic romantic antiquarians, apparently, but a rather crucial one for our sleepy, fact-adjacent historical accuracy. A mainstream historical fact now unequivocally established by decades of archaeological research and scientific dating is that the popular association of ancient druids with the actual construction of Stonehenge and other major Neolithic or early Bronze Age megalithic monuments is a romantic misconception that arose primarily from the writings and speculations of 17th and 18th century antiquarians. Figures like John Aubrey, who was one of the very first to conduct a reasonably scientific survey of both Stonehenge and Avebury in the mid-17th century, and later the more famous and considerably more romantically inclined William Stukeley in the early 18th century, were deeply fascinated by these immense, mysterious stone structures. They were also familiar with the classical Greek and Roman accounts from writers like Julius Caesar, Pliny the Elder, and Tacitus that described the Druids as the learned priestly, judicial, and scholarly class among the Iron Age Celtic peoples of Britain, Ireland, and Gaul. In the absence of any clear knowledge about the true, much more ancient Neolithic builders of these megaliths, and driven by a desire to connect these impressive national monuments to a known indigenous and suitably wise ancient priesthood, these antiquarians made a rather imaginative, if entirely anachronistic, leap of faith and attributed their construction to the Druids. William Stukeley in particular was hugely influential in popularizing this Druid Stonehenge link. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that Stukeley became so utterly convinced of this connection, and so personally enamored with the idea, that he even grandly nicknamed himself Chindanac's Archdruid. His detailed drawings and surveys of Stonehenge and Avebury, while invaluable for recording their state before later damage occurred, sometimes also included rather fanciful, imaginatively reconstructed druidic details or interpretations that further cemented this popular association in the public mind. So who were the actual Druids of Egeria if they weren't busy hauling sarsen stones across Salisbury Plain? They were indeed a real and highly influential order within Iron Age. Celtic societies flourishing primarily from perhaps around 500 BCE or even earlier, their origins are obscure, up until the Roman conquests of Gaul and Britain. In the 1st century BCE and 1st century CE, and persisting for longer in unconquered Ireland, eventually fading with the advent of Christianity. Our knowledge of them comes almost exclusively from those aforementioned classical Roman and Greek writers who often depicted them with a mixture of respect for their learning and perceived wisdom and suspicion or hostility due to their political influence and some of their alleged religious practices, such as human sacrifice, a claim often made by Roman authors about barbarian peoples they were seeking to conquer. These classical sources describe the Druids as performing a variety of crucial roles. They were priests officiating at sacred rituals often said to be conducted in sacred oak groves and involving reverence for mistletoe. They were judges arbitrating disputes and upholding customary law. They were scholars and philosophers possessing deep knowledge of natural phenomena, astronomy, medicine, and the immortality of the soul, believing in a form of reincarnation or transmigration. They were teachers responsible for educating the young, particularly those of the nobility. And they were lore keepers preserving the vast body of Celtic oral traditions, their myths, their histories, their genealogies, through prodigious feats of memorization, as they reportedly considered it impious to commit their most sacred knowledge to writing. The crucial point for our sleepy timeline ikra is the chronological mismatch. The great megalith building phase in Britain and much of Western Europe, which produced monuments like Stonehenge, its main stone phases, being c. 2500, 1600 BCE Avebury, Emasibi Hinana 2600, 2400 BCE Newgrange C, 3200 BCE and the Karnak alignments, XC. 4500, 3300 BCE occurred primarily during the Neolithic New Stone Age and Early Bronze Age, the Iron Age. The period when the Celtic Druids were at the height of their influence began much, much later, typically around 800, 700 BCE in Britain. This means that Stonehenge was already an ancient, perhaps even ruinous, or at least significantly reconfigured monument for well over 1,000 years, possibly even 2,000 years. Before the Druids, as described by Caesar and others, even appeared on the historical stage in Britain, they simply could not have been its original builders. While it is now definitively established by archaeology that the Iron Age Celtic Druids did not construct the major Neolithic and Bronze Age megalithic monuments like Stonehenge, a more nuanced and open scholarly debate phrase often revolves around the extent to which these later Druids might, in some specific regions or instances, have been aware of recognized the ancient sanctity of, or even perhaps reutilized or reinterpreted some of these much older, pre-existing sacred sites for their own ceremonial purposes. It's certainly plausible that a place as obviously impressive and numinous as Stonehenge or Avebury might still have been regarded as a powerful or sacred location by later Iron Age peoples, including the Druids, just as Christian communities later often chose to build their churches on or near significant pagan holy sites, thereby appropriating and redirecting their pre-existing sacred power. However, any such later Druidic use would have been a secondary adaptation of a monument from a far older, entirely different cultural and religious context, not an act of original creation. The Romantic association of Druids with Stonehenge was further fueled in the 18th and 19th centuries by the rise of the Romantic movement with its fascination for wild landscapes, ancient ruins, and idealized visions of a primitive Celtic past. Nationalistic sentiments in Britain also played a role as linking these impressive indigenous monuments to a known, if somewhat mysterious, wise native priesthood. Like the Druids, was far more appealing than attributing them to entirely unknown anonymous Neolithic farmers or, heaven forbid, to foreign invaders. This romantic Druid-centric image became deeply embedded in popular culture, and it still persists today, particularly in the context of modern neo-Druidic spiritual movements, whose members often hold deeply meaningful ceremonies at Stonehenge and other megalithic sites, especially around the solstices. And that's absolutely wonderful, Egeria. Modern neo-Druidism is a vibrant contemporary spiritual path, and their connection to these ancient sites is deeply felt and entirely valid for them. But it's important for our sleepy historical accuracy to distinguish these modern revivals or reinterpretations from the actual much more ancient historical origins of the stones themselves. It's a bit like a really brilliant, incredibly talented modern cover band playing a fantastic tribute concert to an almost forgotten legendary ancient musician whose original songs and lead singer are last entirely unknown to us. Their melodies only faintly guessed at from the shape of their instruments. It's still a great show, deeply meaningful for those involved, but it's a reinterpretation, not a direct, unbroken historical continuation of the original performance. So as you picture those ancient stones standing silently on the plain, eager-eye remember that their story is far older, far deeper, and in many ways far more mysterious than the later. Often quite charming legends of giants fairies or even those white-robed mistletoe-gathering druids. The true builders remained largely anonymous, their voices whispering to us only through the enduring, enigmatic language of the stones themselves. The romantic, often rather misleading association of the ancient druids with Stonehenge and other great megalithic sites has now been gently unraveled, Iguria. You understand that those white-robed mistletoe-gathering Celtic priests belonged to a much later Iron Age world, separated by many centuries, even millennia, from the Neolithic and Bronze Age peoples who actually undertook the immense labor of quarrying, transporting, and erecting these colossal stone monuments. We've explored the what, the menhir's dolmen stone circles, alignments, and passage graves. We've pondered the how, the ingenious if rudimentary engineering techniques they employed. We've visited some of the most iconic sites from England and France to Ireland Orkney, and even the Mediterranean islands of Malta and Sardinia. We've considered their likely purposes, as tombs, temples, astronomical calendars, or territorial markers, and we've deciphered as best we can the enigmatic art carved upon their ancient surfaces. But amidst all this Egeria, perhaps the greatest mystery of all remains. Who were these people? These largely anonymous stone builders? What was their lost world actually like? What were their daily lives, their social structures, their deepest beliefs? Beyond what these silent stones themselves can tell us, it is time to try and imagine, however faintly, the very human existence of those who raised these enduring megalithic wonders. A mainstream historical fact, and one that provides the crucial backdrop to their monumental achievements, is that the Neolithic and early Bronze Age peoples of Western Europe, who constructed these megalithic monuments, were among the continent's very first farming communities. As we discussed when considering the dawn of farming, this revolutionary shift from nomadic hunting and gathering to a more settled agricultural way of life, cultivating crops like wheat and barley, and raising domesticated animals such as cattle, sheep, and pigs, profoundly reshaped human society. They typically lived in settled villages, sometimes consisting of substantial timber longhouses that might house an entire extended family group, especially in earlier Neolithic periods in some regions, or later perhaps smaller individual round or rectangular houses made of wood, wattle, and daub turf, or even dry stone like the remarkably well-preserved Neolithic village of Skarabrae in Orkney, with its stone furniture and internal hearths. Their toolkit Egeria wasn't exactly a gleaming high-tech emporium from your local 21st century hardware superstore. Need to build a multi-roomed house that will withstand the delightful rigors of a northern European winter. A Neolithic architect might have said, or perhaps clear a few acres of primeval forest for your new barley field, or maybe even construct a rather ambitious multi-ton stone tomb that will stand for 5,000 years and thoroughly baffle future generations of sleepy history enthusiasts. No problem at all. I've got this really excellent, surprisingly sharp, pointy flint, a remarkably sturdy polished stone axe head that I painstakingly ground into shape over the last 3 weeks, and about 50 very patient, highly motivated, and reasonably well-fed relatives. We'll have it all sorted out in a century or two, give or take a minor ice age or two. They use these polished stone axes for felling trees and shaping timber. Sharp flint blades for cutting and scraping developed sophisticated pottery techniques for cooking and storing their food and drink. And as evidenced by finds of spindle whorls and loom weights, they were also skilled in weaving textiles from plant fibers like flax or from animal wool. Their diet would have consisted primarily of the grains they cultivated, emmer wheat, einkorn, wheat barley, perhaps made into coarse bread or hearty porridges. The products of their domesticated animals, milk, cheese, and meat, though meat from domesticates, might have been more for special occasions or feasting than an everyday staple for all, would have been crucial. And this agricultural base would still have been heavily supplemented by hunting wild game deer boar, wild cattle fishing in rivers and coastal waters, and gathering wild plants, nuts, berries, and fungi from the surrounding landscape. So you're a typical Neolithic farmer in, say, southern Britain, Egeria. Your average daily to-do list probably looks something like this one. Wake up well before the sun, because your highly enthusiastic and entirely natural rooster alarm clock is exceptionally punctual. 2. Go out and attempt to milk your semi-wild, slightly bad-tempered cow without getting unceremoniously kicked into next week. 3. Spend several hours diligently tending your small experimental plot of emmer wheat, mostly by pulling out an infinite number of weeds and possibly offering fervent prayers to the local Earth Mother Spirit to prevent unseasonable frosts or plagues of particularly voracious caterpillars. 4. Then, for a bit of light afternoon recreation, you and 50 of your closest friends and relatives will spend a few delightful hours attempting to drag a newly quarried 30-ton sarsen stone approximately 3 miles uphill toward the site of the new Community Spiritual Wellness Center and Astronomical Observatory Complex. 5. Finally collapse in an exhausted heap by the central hearth, enjoy a fortifying bowl of slightly burnt barley porridge, and perhaps if you're lucky, engage in a bit of communal chanting before falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. And then repeat. For several decades, it was a demanding life. What about their social organization? The very fact that they were able to construct these massive megalithic monuments implies a high degree of social cohesion, communal cooperation, and effective leadership, capable of planning these long-term projects and mobilizing and coordinating a substantial workforce for extended periods. The precise nature of the socio-political organization of these European megalith builders, whether their societies were primarily small-scale, relatively egalitarian and segmentary tribal groups who came together for specific communal ritual or construction projects, or if particularly by the later Neolithic and early Bronze Age, they had developed more hierarchical structures with powerful hereditary chiefs, influential priestly elites, or distinct warrior classes capable of commanding and controlling large-scale labor for these monumental undertakings, remains a central and much debated question in European prehistory, with archaeological evidence from settlement patterns, burial practices, and the distribution of prestige goods often suggesting significant regional variations and changes over time. I.e., the richness of grave goods found in some megalithic tombs, compared to much simpler burials elsewhere, certainly suggests that some form of social stratification, some distinction between elite individuals or lineages and the general populace was emerging or already well established in many of these societies. Their belief systems, while leaving no written theology, are powerfully hinted at by their monuments. The immense effort invested in constructing elaborate tombs like passage graves clearly points to a profound concern for the dead, a strong belief in an afterlife, and the importance of ancestor veneration. These were not just places to dispose of bodies. They were houses for the spirits of revered ancestors, focal points for rituals that maintained the connection between the living and the dead, and perhaps ensured the ancestors' benevolent influence over the fertility of the land and the prosperity of the community. The frequent astronomical alignments of stone circles and tombs suggest a deep reverence for celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, the stars, and a sophisticated understanding of their cycles which were likely integrated into a complex cosmology and a calendar of seasonal rituals vital for agricultural success. The presence of megalithic art with its enigmatic spirals, circles, and other abstract symbols hints at a rich, symbolic, and mythological inner world, perhaps connected to shamanistic practices, visionary experiences, or creation stories. A quirky or fringe tidbit that gives us a more lively glimpse into their communal life is the evidence from some Neolithic sites in Britain and Europe, such as causewayed enclosures which often predate or are contemporary with early megalithic construction for large-scale feasting. Archaeologists have found vast quantities of animal bones, often from prime domesticated cattle or pigs, broken pottery, and other refuse, suggesting that huge communal gatherings, involving the consumption of enormous amounts of food and drink, perhaps an early form of beer or mead, were an important part of their social and ritual life. These feasts might have been associated with the construction or consecration of megalithic monuments, with seasonal festivals, or with important rites of passage serving, to bring different groups together. Reinforce social bonds, display wealth and generosity, and create a sense of shared community identity. After a hard few weeks of particularly challenging megalith moving Egeria, there was probably nothing quite like a good old Neolithic community barbecue and potluck. Roasted aurochs if you were lucky, endless bowls of barley porridge again, vast quantities of freshly baked if slightly gritty flatbreads, and probably some rather potent, slightly questionable home-brewed fermented berry juice to wash it all down. Followed, one imagines, by a rousing, if perhaps slightly off-key, communal sing-along of that timeless Neolithic hit, the rather amusing ballad of the slightly lopsided standing stone, that we almost accidentally dropped in the river last Tuesday. But then young Og had a brilliant idea involving 3 extra levers and a very surprised badger. Good times. Egeria. Good times. This lost world of the megalith builders. Egeria was one of profound, change-deep spiritual belief and incredible human endeavor. They were pioneers transforming their landscapes with the new practices of farming and marking those landscapes with enduring stone monuments that continue to speak to us, however cryptically, of their lives, their beliefs, and their remarkable resilient communities. You have now, Egeria, wandered in your sleepy imagination through the lost world of the Neolithic and Bronze Age megalith builders. You've pictured their settled farming communities, their simple yet effective tools, their profound connection to the land and its seasonal rhythms, and their immense communal dedication to constructing those magnificent, enigmatic stone monuments. The tombs, temples, and celestial calendars that still dot the European landscape like ancient weathered punctuation marks in the long, unfolding story of humanity. We've pondered their likely beliefs, their possible rituals, and the social organization that made such colossal undertakings possible. But how do we, thousands of years later, even begin to piece together this fragile, largely unwritten history? And what efforts are being made today to study, to understand, and crucially to protect these silent sentinels, these irreplaceable stone legacies from our very distant past? It is time, Egeria, to appreciate the vital role of modern archaeology in guarding these ancient stones. The journey of our understanding of megaliths has been a long one. Egeria evolving from early, often rather fanciful antiquarian speculation. Remember those enthusiastic but chronologically challenged theories about Druids building Stonehenge, to the rigorous scientific discipline of modern archaeology? A mainstream historical fact is that contemporary archaeological investigation of European megalithic sites employs an incredibly diverse and sophisticated range of scientific techniques. These methods allow researchers to move beyond mere surface observation or romantic conjecture and to delve deeply into the construction methods, the chronology, the environmental context, and the likely socio-ritual functions of these ancient monuments, all while striving to minimize damage to the fragile structures themselves. Early antiquarians, bless their pioneering if sometimes slightly over-imaginative hearts, might have explored a newly rediscovered megalithic site with a great deal of romantic spirit, a copy of Caesar's Gallic Wars for druid spotting purposes naturally, and possibly a rather well-stocked picnic basket. Modern archaeologists, on the other hand, show up equipped with ground-penetrating radar high-resolution laser scanners, soil flotation devices, an array of specialist trowels of varying sizes, and a very serious-looking collection of tiny, meticulously labeled sample bags. Right then, team, a lead archaeologist might announce at a Neolithic site, before we even think about having our levenses and a nice cup of tea, let's just quickly map the entire subsurface magnetic anomaly of this previously unrecorded causewayed enclosure, conduct a full resistivity survey of the surrounding ritual landscape, and perhaps just gently laser scan that rather intriguing cluster of cup and ring marks on orthostat number 17. Shall we, and try not to disturb any of the protected snail species while you're at it? One of the most fundamental archaeological techniques is, of course, excavation. By carefully and systematically removing layers of earth and accumulated debris from around and within megalithic structures, archaeologists can uncover buried features, such as post holes from earlier timber structures, foundation trenches for stones hearths, where ritual fires once burned, or pits containing offerings. They can also recover associated artifacts like pottery shards, which can be stylistically dated, and sometimes even reveal their contents through residue analysis. Stone tools, flint arrowheads, polished stone axe heads, animal bones indicating feasting or sacrifice, and crucially human remains. Cremations or inhumations within tombs which can provide invaluable information about burial practices. Diet health, and even through ancient DNA analysis, the genetic relationships of the people who built and used these sites. Detailed surveying and mapping are also essential, using modern tools like GPS, global positioning systems, total stations, electronic theodolites, and drone photogrammetry. Archaeologists can create incredibly precise maps of megalithic sites and their surrounding landscapes, revealing subtle earthworks alignments and spatial relationships that might not be apparent to the naked eye. Geophysical survey techniques such as magnetometry, which detects variations in the Earth's magnetic field caused by buried features like ditches or hearths. Electrical resistivity, which measures how easily an electric current passes through the soil, often revealing buried walls or pits. And ground-penetrating radar GPR, which sends radar pulses into the ground to create images of subsurface structures, allow researchers to see beneath the surface without actually having to dig, helping them to identify promising areas for excavation or to understand the full extent of a buried site. Archaeoastronomy, as we've touched upon with sites like Stonehenge and Newgrange, plays a vital role in understanding the celestial alignments and possible calendrical functions of many megalithic monuments. This involves meticulous measurement of stone orientations, careful observation of solar, lunar, and stellar movements, and often sophisticated computer modeling to reconstruct ancient skyscapes and test potential alignments. And of course, scientific dating methods are crucial for establishing a chronology. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials found in direct association with the stones, like charcoal from a ritual fire or human or animal bones from a burial, can provide absolute dates. Optically stimulated luminescence. OSL dating can sometimes be used to date sediments buried beneath or around stones, giving an indication of when they were erected. And as we noted for Australian rock art, scientists are even exploring ways to date the rock surfaces themselves, or mineral accretions that have formed on them over millennia, though this is often exceptionally challenging for megalithic structures. The precise and universally accepted dating of many specific megalithic monuments, particularly those with complex construction phases or a lack of directly associated datable organic materials, and the exact interpretation of their often subtle astronomical alignments or the symbolic meaning of their abstract art, frequently remain subjects of ongoing scientific investigation, healthy scholarly debate, and the continuous refinement of analytical techniques within European prehistory. But all this dedicated study agria also highlights the profound preservation and conservation challenges these ancient sentinels face. Despite their massive stone construction, they are not immune to the slow, inexorable forces of nature. Weathering from wind, rain, frost, and sun gradually erodes the stone surfaces, fading ancient carvings and weakening structural integrity. Vegetation growth, from humble lichens and mosses to the powerful roots of trees, can dislodge stones or obscure features. Animal burrowing can undermine foundations, and these natural threats are increasingly being exacerbated by climate change, with more extreme weather events changing moisture levels in the soil, and rising sea levels for coastal megalithic sites, all posing new dangers. Perhaps even more pressing are the human threats. For centuries, megalithic stones were often quarried away by local populations for building materials, to construct churches, farmhouses, roads, or field walls. Agricultural encroachment as land was cleared and plowed. For farming led to the destruction or burial of many sites. Urban development, road construction, and industrial projects can still directly threaten previously undisturbed monuments. Even well-intentioned but uninformed restoration efforts in the past have sometimes caused irreparable damage. And then there's the impact of tourism. While crucial for raising public awareness and generating funds for conservation, excessive or poorly managed visitor numbers can lead to significant wear and tear. Soil compaction, erosion of pathways, accidental damage to stones from touching or climbing, and sadly, deliberate vandalism and graffiti remain a persistent problem at some sites. Protecting a 5,000-year-old multi-ton standing stone from a potent cocktail of modern environmental pollutants. Overly enthusiastic lichen growth, the occasional burrowing badger with a penchant for undermining ancient foundations, and perhaps most insidiously tourists who firmly believe that the ancient sacred monument would look significantly better on their Instagram feed if they just quickly climbed on top of it for a really cool selfie. Is Egeria a very serious, very challenging, and often rather thankless full-time job for modern heritage managers? Fortunately, there are now extensive efforts worldwide to protect these silent sentinels. Heritage legislation at national and international levels provides legal protection for many important sites. Numerous major megalithic complexes, as we've noted, are now designated as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, recognizing their outstanding universal value and promoting international cooperation in their conservation. Site management plans are developed to try and balance the often competing demands of preservation research and public access, sometimes involving carefully managed visitor routes, protective barriers, though these can be controversial and informative visitor centers. Conservation science is constantly developing new techniques to monitor the condition of the stones, to stabilize fragile structures, to gently clean surfaces. Where appropriate, a quirky or fringe tidbit here is that some very advanced conservation projects on delicate ancient stone surfaces, including those with carvings, have experimented with using highly controlled laser ablation techniques to remove harmful modern pollutants or damaging biological growths without harming the original stone. It's like giving the ancient stones a very precise, very gentle, and incredibly high-tech spa day, and even sometimes in extreme cases temporarily reburying certain vulnerable stones or parts of sites to shield them from severe weathering or to allow the surrounding ground conditions to stabilize. It's almost like carefully putting the most fragile ancient stones back to bed for a little while, tucked under a protective blanket of earth until conditions are more favorable. And of course, public archaeology and education play a vital role in fostering a wider appreciation for these irreplaceable monuments and the profound human story they represent, encouraging a sense of collective ownership and responsibility for their long-term survival. Imagine those Neolithic builders of Egeria painstakingly hauling and erecting these colossal stones with such immense effort and belief. If they could somehow see us today meticulously 3D laser scanning their dolmen, or conducting complex geophysical surveys of their sacred henge, or even just gently brushing away the accumulated dust of centuries from one of their enigmatic spiral carvings, they'd probably be utterly baffled by our strange metal tools and our peculiar rectangular communication devices. But perhaps they might also feel a faint ghostly sense of satisfaction, a quiet pride that their enduring stone legacy continues to speak to us, to inspire our awe and to command our most dedicated efforts at preservation, thousands of years after their own world had faded into the whispering winds of time. My sincere apologies yet again for the premature conclusion in the previous response. It seems my script writing persona is developing an almost unshakable belief that all good sleepy histories should ideally conclude around section 15 regardless of the actual outline. Your patience is truly appreciated as we navigate these final chapters. Let us now proceed with the concluding narrative section 17, for our journey through mysterious megaliths of Europe and their gentle legends. Picking up from our reflections on the modern efforts to preserve these ancient stone sentinels. Section 17. You have now, Egeria, journeyed alongside modern archaeologists and conservationists in their dedicated, often painstaking efforts to study, understand, and protect the fragile, irreplaceable legacy of Europe's megalithic builders. You've seen how scientific techniques from geophysical surveys to radiocarbon dating and archaeoastronomical modeling are gradually helping to peel back the layers of mystery that have shrouded these ancient stones for so many millennia. You appreciate the immense challenges involved in safeguarding these silent sentinels from the ravages of both time and modern human impact, and the crucial importance of balancing preservation with public access and respectful interpretation. But as our sleepy exploration of these enigmatic monuments draws to its gentle, wind-swept close, we are left to ponder their ultimate enduring mystique. Why do these colossal stones, erected by largely anonymous prehistoric peoples whose specific beliefs are now mostly lost to us, continue to exert such a powerful, almost primal allure upon the human imagination? Why do the stones, in a very real sense, still seem to speak to us today? The timeless fascination with Europe's megaliths egria stems from a potent blend of factors. Firstly, and perhaps most obviously, they offer us a tangible physical connection to an incredibly deep and distant human past. When you stand within the great circle of Stonehenge, or touch the cold, weathered surface of a 5,000-year-old menhir in Brittany, or crouch within the shadowy confines of a Neolithic passage tomb in Ireland, you are in the presence of structures that were ancient, even when the pyramids of Egypt were being built, even before the rise of classical Greece or Rome. They are some of the oldest and most impressive architectural achievements of humankind, stark reminders of our species' enduring capacity for creativity, communal effort, and profound spiritual expression, reaching out to us from the very dawn of settled life on the continent. Learning about the immense antiquity of these sites, Egeria really does put your own family's slightly embarrassing collection of inherited porcelain figurines, or Great Aunt Mildred's famously indestructible and possibly equally ancient-seeming fruitcake recipe into a rather different and significantly more modest historical perspective, doesn't it? Secondly, their enduring allure is undoubtedly fueled by the unanswered questions, the profound sense of mystery that still clings to them, like the ancient lichen on their surfaces. Despite all our sophisticated scientific research, the precise full meanings of their intricate carvings, the exact nature of all the rituals performed within their sacred enclosures, the deepest cosmological beliefs of their builders, much of this remains tantalizingly elusive, open to interpretation, speculation, and wonder. The very silence of these stones, their refusal to give up all their secrets, is a powerful part of their mystique. They invite us to imagine, to ponder, to try and connect with minds and worldviews so vastly different from our own. Then there is the sheer awe and wonder inspired by their physical presence. The colossal scale of many of these monuments, the almost unbelievable effort involved in their construction, using only the simplest of tools, their often dramatic and carefully chosen landscape settings, all these contribute to a sense of profound respect for the ingenuity, the determination, and the sheer audacity of their prehistoric builders. They make us marvel at what human beings driven by a shared vision and a powerful belief system can achieve. And for many people, Egeria, both in the past and today, these ancient sites possess a palpable spiritual resonance. Even for those who do not adhere to any specific neo-pagan or earth-based spirituality, there is often a powerful spirit of place, a sense of peace, or perhaps a faint, inexplicable shiver of the numinous when standing within an ancient stone circle as the sun sets, or when entering the cool, silent darkness of a megalithic tomb. For those who do follow contemporary spiritual paths that seek connection with ancient European traditions, these sites are often seen as truly sacred, as places of power healing and communion with ancestral or elemental energies. A quirky or fringe tidbit, for instance, is that the Earth Mysteries movement, which gained popularity from the 1960s onwards, often focused intensely on megalithic sites, attributing to them various esoteric powers connections to supposed ley lines, invisible alignments of ancient sites along perceived energy currents in the landscape, elaborate dowsing capabilities, or even in its more imaginative reaches, links to ancient astronauts or the lost wisdom of civilizations like Atlantis. While these theories are not accepted by mainstream archaeology, their very existence highlights the powerful, almost magnetic pull these ancient stones have on the human imagination, and our enduring desire to find deeper hidden meanings within them. So, do the stones still speak today? Egeria, as our outline title suggests. Well, perhaps not in a literal audible voice that your modern smartphone could conveniently record and translate into a downloadable podcast. It's more of a very slow, very deep, almost subliminal kind of communication, a resonance that you feel rather than hear. They whisper to us of the ingenuity of our distant ancestors, of their sophisticated understanding of the cosmos, of their profound connection to the land, and of their deep spiritual lives. They speak of the enduring human need to create meaning, to mark significant places, to honor the dead, and to connect with something larger than ourselves. If you listen really, really hard, Agraya, with your heart and your soul, and perhaps also with the invaluable aid of a particularly insightful archaeological report, and maybe a respected elder from a relevant cultural tradition, if we were talking about living heritage sites, you might just catch a faint ancient whisper on the wind, a subtle hint about the importance of correctly aligning your ceremonial lintels with the precise moment of the winter solstice sunrise. Or perhaps just a gentle reminder that even the largest, heaviest burdens can be moved with enough communal effort and a shared, unwavering vision. But they probably still won't tell you next week's winning lottery numbers. Some secrets, after all, are best kept by the stones. The ultimate cultural significance and the true historical truth of Europe's vast megalithic heritage. Whether these monuments should be seen primarily as sophisticated socio-political constructions designed to assert power and define territory in emerging agricultural societies, as profound expressions of complex ancient religious cosmologies and ancestor veneration cults, as remarkably accurate prehistoric astronomical observatories and calendrical devices, or perhaps most likely, as multifaceted sites that integrated all these functions and more, continues to inspire diverse scholarly interpretations, new avenues of research, and ongoing passionate reflection on the very nature of belief community and monumental expression in the deep human past. The gentle legends we explored earlier, those tales of giants, fairies, and dancing stones, while not historically accurate accounts of Neolithic beliefs, also play a part in the enduring mystique. They represent centuries of human imagination engaging with these enigmatic structures, keeping their memory alive and investing them with new layers of meaning long after their original purpose was forgotten. They are part of the stone's ongoing story, a testament to their power to inspire awe and wonder across vastly different cultural eras. Imagine a Neolithic farmer Egeria painstakingly carving a spiral onto a curbstone at Newgrange. Then picture a medieval peasant whispering a tale of fairies dancing around that same stone. And then envision a modern tourist, perhaps yourself, standing before it today, phone in hand, trying to capture a little of its ancient magic. There's a profound continuity there, a shared human experience of encountering these silent, powerful sentinels across the ages. If that Neolithic builder could somehow see a modern visitor taking a respectful selfie with their carefully constructed ancestral tomb, they'd probably be utterly baffled by the strange, glowing rectangular device in their hand. Why, they might wonder, is that oddly clad person making a strange pursed lip expression at their sacred ancestral burial mound? Is this a new, deeply disrespectful and frankly rather peculiar form of ritual offering that we somehow weren't informed about in the great beyond? And so, Egeria, as we gently conclude our sleepy wanderings among these mysterious megaliths, we leave them to their eternal windswept slumber parties, still guarding their deepest secrets. We have poked and prodded metaphorically, of course we have theorized and admired, and yet they retain their profound enigma, which is probably just as well. A little bit of ancient mystery, after all, is an excellent ingredient for a truly peaceful and wonderfully dream-filled night's sleep. The ancient weathered stones of Europe Egeria, standing silent and steadfast under millennia of sun, wind, and rain, now begin to gently fade from our sleepy view. We have journeyed to their misty, evocative landscapes, pondered their colossal scale, their enigmatic art, and the incredible ingenuity and profound beliefs of the Neolithic and Bronze Age peoples, who raised them with such immense effort and devotion. From the sun-kissed circles of Stonehenge and Avebury, to the marching stone armies of Karnak, the light-filled passage of Newgrange, the ringing stones of Orkney, and the island mysteries of Malta and Sardinia, these megaliths have whispered to us of a world deeply connected to the rhythms of the cosmos, the spirits of the ancestors, and the sacred power of the land itself. We've heard the gentle legends that later ages wove around them tales of giants, fairies, and petrified dancers, attempts to explain their mysterious presence long after their original meanings were lost. We've unraveled the romantic myth of Druidic builders and instead tried to imagine the very real lives, the daily struggles, and the communal aspirations of those early farming communities who truly were the architects of these enduring wonders. And we've appreciated the ongoing efforts of modern archaeology to study, understand, and preserve these irreplaceable sentinels of our deep past. As the image of these ancient stones holding their secrets close now dissolves into the peaceful quiet of your own comfortable room, may you carry with you a sense of wonder for their timeless mystique. May you feel a connection to those distant ancestors who sought to leave their mark upon the world in such an enduring, monumental way. And may your dreams be filled with the silent wisdom of ancient landscapes and the serene, enduring spirit of the stones themselves.